Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, October 30th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, John Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 390 of Israel's genocide in Gaza as the war on Lebanon expands. Coming up, we'll have a discussion with Ahmed Al-Naouk, co-founder and director of We Are Not Numbers, to talk about how he finds the strength to continue his work and advocacy for Palestine in the face of intense grief and ceaseless worry for those still trying to survive the genocide. Later on in the program, John will cover the latest resistance news from the battle in Jabalia, operations in the northern West Bank, and Hezbollah's ongoing defense of southern Lebanon. But first, here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza and Lebanon. Israel has continued to slaughter Palestinians in the northern Gaza Strip as a complete siege on the area continues for the fourth week. This is the scene in northern Gaza, stated reporter Anas Al-Sharif on Tuesday. After a catastrophic massacre yesterday in Beit Lahia, Anas's colleague, journalist Hossam Shabat, tweeted, quote, "No cemeteries, no hospitals, no doctors, no civil defense, no ambulances. The living are under the rubble and no one can rescue them. The situation in North Gaza gets more horrific by the minute." At least 109 Palestinians were killed in the airstrike that completely destroyed a 5-story building sheltering displaced families in Beit Lahia. The Gaza government media office reported that, quote, "the occupation army knew that this residential building contained dozens of displaced civilians, and that the majority of them were children and women who were displaced from their civilian residential neighborhoods." This new crime comes in conjunction with the Israeli occupation's plan to destroy the health system in the northern Gaza Strip governorate and destroy the 4 hospitals and put them out of service, as well as in conjunction with the occupation's prevention of the entry of treatments, medicines, and medical supplies. People searched through the rubble with their bare hands, trying to rescue survivors. Another airstrike in Beit Lahia killed at least 10 people later in the day on Tuesday. According to reporters, many of the people sheltering in Beit Lahia were displaced from nearby Jabalia, which has been under heavy siege and brutal attacks over the last several weeks. Early on Tuesday morning, Israeli forces burned the United Nations Al-Fahura school in Jabalia camp north of the Gaza Strip. Last Thursday, October 24th, Gaza's Civil Defense Corps reported that the Israeli military carried out a major massacre in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, destroying at least 10 residential buildings. According to local news agencies, approximately 150 people were killed or injured in that attack. Journalist Anas Al-Sharif reported that because of the complete destruction of medical services in northern Gaza, quote, "anyone who is injured will be murdered. Jabalia camp is being exterminated on the heads of its residents." The next day, journalists reported that the Israeli army stormed Kamal Adwan Hospital, kidnapping medical personnel and patients. The soldiers rampaged through the hospital, destroying equipment and personal belongings while laying siege to the building itself. Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated that, quote, "in addition to separating the men from the women and children, the occupation forces began questioning, abusing, and assaulting anyone over the age of 13, including medical personnel." The Israeli army bombed the hospital's oxygen station, threatening the lives of the 15 patients in the intensive care unit, including children. There is also preliminary information that several children have already died from the oxygen shortage. Communication is completely cut off within the hospital in light of the danger to everyone's lives. The hospital was stormed just hours after the arrival of an international delegation carrying a limited amount of medicine and fuel supplies. The young son of the hospital's director, Hossam Abu Safia, was killed inside the hospital by Israeli tank shelling that day. Here's a video of Dr. Abu Safia and his colleagues in the courtyard of the hospital performing burial rites for his son, Ibrahim.
Allahu Akbar. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Dr. Abu Safia said that after the Israeli army's withdrawal from the hospital, more than 30 of his colleagues were taken or arrested, leaving just him and a colleague, a pediatrician, to care for nearly 150 patients, some of them in need of surgeries that he or his colleague cannot perform. Speaking to Al Jazeera, Dr. Abu Safia said on Saturday that, quote, "We have lost everything in this hospital, even our children. Everything we have built, they have burned. They burned our hearts. They killed my son. My son was killed because we are carrying a humanitarian message. Our children are being killed. I buried my son beside the hospital wall." On Tuesday, Dr. Abu Safia again spoke to Al Jazeera in the aftermath of the Israeli siege on the hospital. He said, quote, "The 𝐓𝐿 𝐴dwan hospital and the entire vicinity is a war zone. The hospital is left with no resources, no medical supplies, and no medical staff," he said. "We appeal to the entire world to have a safe humanitarian passage opened immediately and without any delay. We need specialized medical staff in all major disciplines to be allowed in," the doctor said, adding, quote, "I received a wounded child who is in dire need of abdominal surgery to stop his internal bleeding before he loses his life. Many children have their bones sticking out of their bodies, requiring urgent orthopedic surgeries. Many are suffering from brain injuries and require delicate procedures." On October 24th, Ash-Shuhada school in Nuseirat camp was hit and a fire reportedly broke out, according to the government media office. 17 Palestinians were killed, including 9 children, and more than 50 others were injured. On October 26th, Israel committed a massacre in Beit Lahia. Journalist Anas al-Sharif reported that dozens were killed and injured when Israel bombed 5 homes. Israel also attacked sheltering families in Nuseirat refugee camp and Deir Balah in the central Gaza Strip, as well as in Gaza City, just south of Beit Lahia, over the last few days. On Monday, the Wafa news agency reported that 3 Palestinians, including a child, were killed by Israeli bombs in the Burej and Maghazi refugee camps in central Gaza. According to local reporters, the child in Maghazi was shot by an Israeli drone. Israel attacked Deir Balah and Khan Yunis early this morning, bombing tents sheltering displaced people. Israel's mass forced expulsion of Palestinians, attacks against hospitals and medical workers, and the magnitude of destruction in northern Gaza is, quote, "an unforgivable, relentless campaign against a population who do not have another choice," according to the emergency coordinator for Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, this week. Last week, the Palestinian Civil Defense Corps announced that they were forced to completely stop their operations in the north of Gaza due to Israel's nonstop massacres and targeting of firefighting and search and rescue vehicles. According to the civil defense, along with the complete siege of all 3 hospitals in the northern area, 5 of their members were arrested by Israeli soldiers and abducted to an unknown location. Israeli tanks, they added, shelled and destroyed the only remaining fire truck. And 3 of their members in Beit Lahia were targeted by an Israeli drone. Following the storming and rampant destruction of 𝐓𝐿 𝐴dwan Hospital earlier this week, as I reported, the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza stated, quote, "We do not understand how the world allows itself to stand by and watch the most heinous genocide and the most widespread systematic operation to destroy the health system and kill and arrest patients and medical staff without doing anything." The United Nations said this week that, quote, "children in Gaza are not only dying from bombs, bullets, and shells, but also because those who survive are prevented from leaving Gaza to receive life-saving care." According to UNICEF, only 127 children in critical condition have been allowed to leave the Strip since May. Joyce Msuya, The acting Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and the Emergency Relief Coordinator for the United Nations stated over the weekend, quote, "What Israeli forces are doing in besieged North Gaza cannot be allowed to continue. Hospitals have been hit and health workers have been detained. Shelters have been emptied and burned down. First responders have been prevented from saving people from under the rubble. Families have been separated, and men and boys are being taken away by the truckload. Hundreds of Palestinians have reportedly been killed. Tens of thousands have been forced to flee yet again. The entire population of North Gaza is at risk of dying," Msuya said. Similar statements were made by the UN's human rights chief, Volker Turk, who said that the darkest days of the, quote, "Gaza conflict are unfolding." The UN Human Rights Office said it was, quote, "appalled by the attacks in Beit Lahia," and called for a, quote, "prompt, transparent, and detailed investigation into the circumstances of the strike and responsibilities for it." Meanwhile, the spokesperson for the U.S. State Department and custodian of Israeli war crimes, Matthew Miller, called it a, quote, horrifying incident with a horrifying result, but of course insisted Washington had contacted Israeli officials and, quote, "made clear we want to know exactly what happened, how you could have a result that produces, according to reports, dozens of children dead, and we don't yet know the answer to that question." Israel has killed 5 more journalists this week in Gaza, bringing the number of media workers killed since October 2023 to more than 180, according to the government media office. Syed Radwan from the local Al-Aqsa TV, Hamza Abu Salmiya from the Sanad news agency, and Haneen Baroud, who worked for Al-Quds Foundation, were killed in Israeli airstrikes. In separate attacks, Nadia Imad Al-Sayed, a media professional, producer, and presenter with radio stations and media outlets, and Abdul Rahman Samir Al-Tanani, who worked with Zaman and Sawat Al-Shab radio stations, were also killed, the Gaza government media office stated. This week, the Israeli parliament passed bills to ban the United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees, the latest in a series of measures aimed at debilitating and destroying the agency over the last year. UNRWA, which supports Palestine refugees in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, including occupied East Jerusalem, as well as in Lebanon and Syria, provides education, healthcare, social services, and emergency relief to people who have been expelled from their original land and villages in historic Palestine for the last 76 years and counting. Philippe Lazzarini, the head of the agency, admonished the Israeli government's move to ban UNRWA and said that it sets a dangerous precedent in that it opposes the UN Charter and violates Israel's obligations under international law. Lazzarini said, quote, "These bills will only deepen the suffering of Palestinians, especially in Gaza, where people have been going through more than a year of sheer hell. It will deprive over 650,000 girls and boys there from education, putting at risk an entire generation of children. These bills increase the suffering of the Palestinians and are nothing less than collective punishment," he said. Putting an end to UNRWA and its services will not strip the Palestinians from their refugee status. That status is protected by another UN General Assembly resolution until a fair and lasting solution is found to the plight of the Palestinians. The Secretary General of Amnesty International stated on Tuesday, quote, "This unconscionable law is an outright attack on the rights of Palestinian refugees. It is clearly designed to make it impossible for the agency to operate in the occupied Palestinian territory by forcing the closure of the UNRWA headquarters in East Jerusalem and ending visas for its staff. It amounts to the criminalization of humanitarian aid and will worsen an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis." Of course, since the agency's inception a year after the Nakba in 1949, there has always been one very simple alternative to UNRWA, and that would be forcing Israel to end its colonial project and let the millions of Palestinian refugees return home. We'll have more on the implications of the UNRWA ban later on in the program. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of this one by Asil Al-Mansi about her harrowing experience being forcibly expelled out of Jabalia earlier this month. Asil writes that she and her family at home in Al-Fallujah neighborhood of Jabalia had taken in her cousin and his family who were escaping certain death, she says, after a missile landed on the roof of her cousin's home. They stayed away from windows because, quote, there was shrapnel and bullets flying everywhere. We all stayed in one room, stuck together, and prayed for safety. In our house, we were 25, including my family and our displaced relatives. None of us dared even step outside at this point, she writes. Asil explains that on October 9th, helicopter gunships and quadcopters rained down bullets on rooftops, destroying water tanks. The next morning, they saw their neighbors on the move, and the family decided to leave their house too. Asil talks about her beloved cat, Falful, quote, who had moved with us from the very first days of the war and accompanied us through every stage of our journey. Falful held a special place in my father's heart, perhaps even more than the rest of us. The morning of October 18th unfolded as normally as any during genocide. We woke up, baked bread, prepared breakfast, and performed Friday prayers together. At 2 p.m., everything suddenly went black. I couldn't see, hear, or speak. Around me was just dense blackness. Sand and dust blurred my vision. I could barely see. I had a terrifying thought that I was the only survivor because I couldn't hear anyone else. Gradually, sounds returned. I felt rubble beneath my feet. I stumbled forward until I heard my mother's voice. Osama recited the Shahada. I bear witness that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. We all repeated after him, feeling that death was at our door. Slowly, the darkness lifted, and we began to see the devastation around us. In the living room, we found my father unconscious. We screamed. My mother checked him, fearing the worst, but suddenly he opened his eyes and assured us that he was fine. But he was injured. His right leg was torn, bleeding profusely with bone showing. We shouted for help, and our neighbors rushed over to carry him on a rug from the living room to the door to wait for an ambulance. Osama and Karam carried him outside, both barefoot, stepping on rubble, broken furniture, glass, and shrapnel. My mother followed, shocked and bareheaded. My sisters and I were left behind, wondering what to do. We knew we had to leave, so we packed what was left of our belongings and kept looking for Falful. From the moment of the bombing, I had searched for Falful. We couldn't find him. Carrying our bags, we left the destroyed house in tears, worrying for our wounded father and mourning his missing cat. Falful, his loyal companion, would wait for my father by the door even when he was late and only ever wanted to sleep by his side. Falful would even jump on my father when he came home with his favorite treats and refused to let anyone else bathe him. At the end of the piece, Asil writes, quote, my father, Osama, and Karam are still besieged at Al-Aqsa hospital in Jabalia. My father's wound has reopened and he is in desperate need of surgery. We have learned also that our beloved Falful is still in the house where we'd been bombed, sitting in the very spot where my father had been injured, as if waiting for us to return. That's from Asil Al-Mansi's feature, Escaping Jabalia, on electronicintifada.net. Turning northwards, Israel has continued to escalate its bombing attacks against civilians across Lebanon in recent days. The United Nations reports that recent strikes on the governorates of Baalbek, Hermel, and Bekaa in eastern Lebanon have killed at least 60 people and injured dozens, according to local authorities. Lebanon's health ministry reports that at least 2,700 people have been killed and nearly 13,000 wounded in Israeli attacks since October of 2023. The ministry reported that at least 77 people were killed on Tuesday alone in airstrikes across the country. In the ancient city of Tyre, or Sur, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Israel has carried out a series of bombing attacks on buildings. Euromed Human Rights Monitor says that Israel has increased its use of internationally banned white phosphorus bombs on Lebanon. Quote, Israel is escalating its crimes against civilians and protected objects in Lebanon by using internationally prohibited weapons and highly destructive bombs for the fourth consecutive week since the start of its large-scale assault. Last week, Israel killed several journalists in the south of Lebanon in what media outlets say was a targeted attack. Ghassan Najjar, a cameraman for the Lebanese channel Al-Mayadeen, the channel's broadcast engineer Mohammed Reda, and Al-Manar's cameraman 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 were all killed in the airstrike. The killings came just a day after Al-Mayadeen's Beirut office was bombed. According to the news outlet, Al-Mayadeen had evacuated the premises at the onset of the aggression against Lebanon. Over the past year, Al-Mayadeen's journalists have been threatened, assaulted, and killed. Finally, as we always do, we wanted to share videos of people expressing defiance and resilience in the face of Israel's widening campaign of destruction. Artist and content creator 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 uploads videos and photos of Palestinian children, well-loved dogs and cats, and his family. This is a video he took this week of a children's choir in practice at a shelter in Nuseirat camp in central Gaza. And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you for that. It's been, we say this every week, such a difficult week, but just the scale of the atrocities is hard to fathom.
Yeah.
That piece by Asil al-Mansi is extraordinary. How she wrote that after going through what her family went through and still very concerned about her father. And we hope we'll get some positive news about him soon. We'll keep checking in with her.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and as the journalists and the remaining health workers there keep saying, what we're seeing in Gaza, what makes it out of northern Gaza these days is just a fraction of what's actually happening. I mean, the just unimaginable catastrophic horrors day after day after day, especially over the last 4 weeks, as Israel continues this plan of extermination in broad daylight, documenting their own war crimes, bragging about their own war crimes, getting full support from the U.S. It's I'm constantly running out of words. It's just I'm just in a state, I know we all are, of complete disbelief. Yeah. Well, we'll have much more coming up later on in the program, but we let's bring on our first guest.
Yeah. Thank you, Nora. And just a reminder, you're tuned in to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abunimah, here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. In an article published by The New Arab last week, today's guest, Ahmed al-Naouq, writes the following words. It was exactly this time last year that I sent my usual message to my family on our WhatsApp group, asking if they were all okay. I had no idea this would be my last message to them. Until today, no one has responded. It has been a year since Israel dropped a bomb on my family home, murdering 21 of my closest relatives. They were Ahmed's father, Nasri al-Naouq, who was 75, his sister Wala and her children Raghd, aged 13, Islam, 12, Sarah, aged 9, and Abdullah, who was 6. Ahmed's brother Muhammad with his children Bakr, aged 11, Basima, aged 9, his sister Ala and her children Islam, aged 13, Dima, who was 12, Tala, who was 8, 4-year-old Noor, and Nesma, the youngest, who was just 2. His sister Aya and her children, Malak, 12, Muhammad, 9, and Tamim, 6. The Israeli attack also killed Ahmed's brother Mahmoud al-Naouq, who was 25, and his cousin Ali, who is 35. Ahmed's article is titled, "Israel thought they could bury my family, but they didn't realize they were seeds." He says that while writing this article, for the first time I've dared to look back at our conversations in the weeks before the unthinkable happened, scrolling through the WhatsApp chats with my siblings, listening to the voice notes, reading the text messages, even casting my eyes over the photos we once shared with each other. Ahmed 𝐐𝐞 is co-founder and director of We Are Not Numbers. He hosts a podcast with Palestine Deep Dive. He is advocacy officer for Euromed Human Rights Monitor. He has a master's degree in international journalism from Leeds University, and his writings have been published by the Gulf News, the New Arab, and other publications. Ahmed appeared on the Electronic Intifada livestream exactly a year ago, and that was just days after Israel's massacre of his family. We're very pleased to welcome you back today, Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you, Noura.
Hi, Ahmed. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ahmed. Ahmed, your article is so beautifully written, and it's painful and heartbreaking just to read it. It must have been extremely difficult for you to write and to relive the agony of your family's loss. Did you find comfort in telling some of the stories of happier days with your family? And are there any of those memories that you would like to share with us now?
If I have to be honest with you, Ali, I never struggled to write a story more than I did with writing this story. And the New Arab approached me maybe 2 months ago asking me to write a story on the anniversary of the 7th of October. And then I promised them yes, and then I couldn't actually write a story. And then I promised again that I would write a story for the anniversary of my family. And I was supposed to submit the story like 1 week or 2 weeks before the anniversary of my family. And I kept procrastinating because it was very, very difficult on me to start the process of writing for the first time in my life. I wrote many features before. I wrote many stories before, but this was the first time I struggled really to start writing about my family. Well, 10 years ago, as I said in the story, Israel killed my brother, my older brother. And that was the first time I lose a family member. But writing a story about my brother back then, 10 years ago, it was much easier than writing a story about my family. And I think it's because when you lose only one brother, when you only lose one family member, you know that your sadness, your agony, your pain is focused, is concentrated. You know what you are lamenting for. You know what you are crying for. You know what is very deeply painful to you. It is a brother. 10 years ago, when Israel killed my brother, I couldn't forget about my brother. Immediately after I lost my brother, I remembered all these stories that we had together, the memories, the pictures. And for me, that was a relief because I knew who I am sad for. But when you lose 21 members of your family, it is very difficult, but at the same time, you could not know who you cry for. You could not know who you weep for. I didn't know to think about my father or my brother or my other brother or my sisters or my nieces and nephews, the 14 kids who I raised, some of them. I was very distracted for the past year. And because I was very distracted, I couldn't think of one specific person of them. I couldn't dare to think of one of them for the past year. I would always avoid talking about them. I would avoid going to WhatsApp messages that I shared with one of them. So it was very difficult. And I purposefully try to avoid remembering them, because if I remember them, all of them, I will be 100 times more depressed than I am. But because I promised the New Arab that I will write a story about them, I forced myself only on the 21st of October, which is the anniversary of my family, to write something. And then I sat on my laptop and I said, okay, I want to write. What should I write about? And I had no idea what should I write about. There are literally hundreds of memories, hundreds of stories, thousands of memories I could write about. So you would feel very, very distracted. You don't know what to write or what should you write. It's 21 members of your family. And those family, I lost them only on the 22nd of October. But after that, I lost many other family members. So I was very distracted. Then I found myself going to our chat, a group on WhatsApp, and then going to each one of my family members' WhatsApp and reading the messages for the first time. And I have to say, for the past year, I wasn't very emotional. You know, okay, I have to say that for a distraction. My wife lost a family member, her brother, on the 7th of October last year. And you know, when you hear that he was killed on the 7th of October, you would think that he was one of Hamas fighters who entered Israel. No, he was sleeping in his home when Israel dropped a bomb on his family, on his home, and he was killed. And then on the 7th of October, the other year, my wife was with me and she was crying because she saw the memories of that year, of that incident. And I told her, why are you crying for? You only lost one family member. So for me, like losing one family member feel like naive, silly. Like you shouldn't cry for your brother. You shouldn't weep for your brother. It's only one brother. And then, yes, a year after that, when I wanted to write a story, I couldn't write about one person. So I started reading all the WhatsApp groups and messages, and then for the first time, I felt that I am very emotional. Because as I said, I was not emotional for the past year because I lost so many, so I stopped being emotional. Then suddenly, when I started reading these messages and listen to the voice notes from my family member, I started crying. Because why I'm saying that? It's because the last messages I shared with my family members were actually some good memories. It was finally my family members had some comfort in their life. I have to be honest with you. I wasn't raised in a very rich family. My father was a very hardworking a man, and we struggled all of our life financially and so many problems. But finally, a few months before the war, finally our status got better. Finally, my brothers and sisters had some positive uh, stuff that happened to their life. For example, my brother Muhammad used to live in, you know, a house, a flat, asbestos flat. So it was leaking water in him all the time for many years. Was leaking water in him. His bathroom was very destroyed. That it was leaking water from underground. And finally, my brother asked me to borrow him some money so can he fix his house. And the last message I had with my brother, he was sending me messages of his flat. That's finally he's renovating his house. Finally, the water would stop would stop leaking on his house. Finally, he was very happy. My other sister, she just moved to another house. She used to live in a very small flat for her and her 4 children. And finally, she moved to a house that she and her husband used to build, was saving money for 10 years to build. It was a very nice house, very beautiful. My other sister, they were highly in debt for 30 years, for 13 years. And only 2 months before the war, they paid off all of their debt, and they were finally doing well. My brother Mahmoud, he finally got the scholarship that he wanted for so long to study international relations in Australia, and he was very happy. So all of my family members during the past like 2 months before the war, they were very happy, and I was engaged at that time, and my family were very happy for me because I got engaged finally after many years. You know, they've been waiting for this moment. So all of the messages that I saw on the WhatsApp group and the WhatsApp chats with me and my siblings were happy memories. And suddenly I look in my phone, and everything is gone. My brother and his children and his home that he was still renovating is gone. My father, I remember the last conversation I had with my father, and it was during the war, and he told me he's very resilient. He doesn't fear Israel, and he is going to stand fast in his home forever, and nothing could break him. He is gone. My brother and his scholarship is gone. My sisters and all of their children is gone. All their dreams, all their aspiration, everything that they have worked for is gone. All my memories in my home that I was raised up in is gone. So it was very difficult to write that. It was one of the most stories that I struggled with. And I don't think that I will ever write something that I will struggle as much as I did with this story.
Yeah.
Ahmed, I just want to say you did such a beautiful job paying tribute to your family, and it's just unfathomable what you've gone through, and to think that there are, every single loss is a whole universe destroyed, and yet there are so many people who, like you, have lost dozens of family members and who are going through the same thing, and it's just unbearable.
And especially, you left Gaza, years ago, and like Ali said, for many Palestinians around the world who have family in Gaza, it just, it's unspeakable. The constant fear, the survivor's guilt, and the trauma, and this just the overwhelm. What you were saying about losing one family member versus nearly 24. How do you even start to process all of the weight of that grief? You talked about your father and the last phone call that you had with your father Nasri. You write in your piece, "My father was my weak spot. Even before the war, it always brought a tear to my eye when I thought about him and realized how far away I was. The prospect of losing him while I was away had haunted me for years. I had already lost my mother after I left for the UK, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing my father the same way." Can you talk a little bit about that constant fear as someone not in Palestine, who are watching, watching what's happening now for 13 months? Tell us a bit maybe about your father and how he continues to inspire you, and what thoughts can you share with other Palestinians from Gaza who are far away from their families and from their homes in Gaza?
Yes, of course. So my father was my weakest spot, because no matter how much I try to praise my father, I will never give him his right. For me, he was the definition of perfection. He was the definition of passion, of love, of sympathy. He was the most compassionate person I've ever met and I will ever meet in my life. And he was a very, very hard worker. My father was the most intelligent person I met. He has a photographic memory. He spoke English and Hebrew fluently without going to college or school. He was very smart, very distinguished, but unfortunately he didn't go to college because he had to support his family when he was very young, when my grandfather died. So, and my father, I don't know. Okay, let's stop talking about what he was. My father was born in 1948, a few months after the Nakba. And I said this story many times, and I will keep saying it every time. I will never get enough of telling stories about my family. On the same day that my grandmother was giving birth to my father, while she was giving birth to my father, in Deir al-Balah, in Gaza, in 1948, her father and her uncle went to the market, in Deir al-Balah market. And while they were there shopping or fetching a doctor to see my father, I don't know what the consequences were, but they were in the market. And Israel dropped a bomb on the market in Deir al-Balah on the day that my father came to life, and both of them were killed. So my father was born during the Nakba, and he was killed during the second Nakba. He was killed at the age 75. And as you can see, he was a very, very simple person. He wasn't sophisticated. He wasn't arrogant. He was very simple, very kind. He used to be a laborer, hard worker. He used to go every day from 2 a.m. in the morning to go to Israel in the 70s and 80s and 90s to work as laborer and get back home every day at 7 or 8 p.m. He used to work very, very hard just to support us. He had 9 children. Do you imagine one person with a laborer and he had 90 children? He had to raise them, educate them, spend some money on them. But his life was very difficult. But having a very difficult life did not crush his soul. He was always very compassionate. I'm going to tell you 2 stories to explain to you how passionate and how merciful he was. My mother died during when I was in the UK in 2020. And losing my mother crushed me because I was away from her. I couldn't see her. I couldn't kiss her goodbye. and it crushed me. But I always said, okay, the moment I return to Gaza, I will go and just have some memories, have something like to remind me of my mother. And I always thought, okay, my mother had some jewelry that she inherited from her grandmother, and that was very special to my mother because she inherited this jewelry from her mother. So I said, when I go back to Gaza, I will have part of this jewelry and I will save them because they will remind me of my mother. But then a few months before the war, some thieves jumped into our home and they stole the jewelry of my mother. And that I was very angry and very sad, not because of the value of the jewelry, it's not very expensive, but because it meant a lot to us, to me and to my brothers and to my father. But then out of by coincidence, by chance, the police knew about it and they put the man who stole the jewelry in prison. And then when they questioned him, he said he sold the jewelry so that he can buy drugs because he was like a drug addict. And then after a month or less, his family came to my father and they told him, please forgive us and let the man get out of prison. And my father, just like that, he said, I forgive you. So he did not care about life. Only a few days before the war started, and I saw the pictures on my chat with my brother. My brother and my father were going out to buy something for my brother's flat, to fix the flat. And then while they were in the car, a truck came and they hit the car of my father. And he almost, fortunately, the truck hit the car from the back, so it didn't hurt my father. But it was only like 30 or 40 centimeters before my father like get injured or something, and he crushed the car, that truck. So I called my father and I was very angry and I was very sad. How did this happen? What did you do to this man? And he said, I just forgave him. I told him why. He said, he just said sorry and I just forgave him. So my father forgave the man who almost killed him because of his recklessness. So that was my father, a very passionate man, a very cool man. And I never saw my father angry or sad. Nothing in the world could make him angry. Nothing in the world could make him sad. Nothing in the world would make him feel like hateful or have a grudge in his heart. He always forgives people no matter what they do to him. No matter what you do to my father, he would always forgive you. He never shouted at anyone. He never cursed anyone. He never made any one of us sad, even our children. He was he was 75 years old, but he had open heart surgery and he was sick. And he would never ask me or my brothers to grab him a cup of water, for example. He would do it himself. So my father, for me and my siblings, he was our weakest spot. And after my mom died, because Israel did not allow her to receive treatment in 2020, and while I was in the UK, I would every day before I go to sleep, I would remember my father, and I would say, if my father passes away when I am outside, I will never forgive myself forever. I want to be with him. If anything happens to my father, I will never forgive myself. And even before the war, when I have this thought that something might happen to my father, I would immediately find tears in my eyes because he was very special to me. He was very kind. I loved him more than anyone in the world. And suddenly he's gone, but not only him and his children and his grandchildren. And my father was a very simple man, but he was very political. And he was very, very well read. Every day he would spend hours and hours reading all the newspapers that he could find. And he was very hopeful. He never lost hope that Palestine will be free. He always told us that no matter what happens, this is an occupation will go. But he was not apolitical. He never joined any political movement. He was a very simple man, but he had a very wise political insight. And I think it is because of him I am who I am. And I will always be grateful to him.
Allah يرحمه, Allah يرحمهم جميعا. There are really no words to express the depth of your loss and the loss of so many people this past year, that I think we can see, Ahmed, that it's going to take a very long time to even start to come to terms with the scale of this genocide. And we're so grateful to you for sharing what you have shared about your family. So we keep them alive, and we try to keep everyone alive through our memories and our stories. And amid the extraordinary loss, and this struck me so much about your writing, Ahmed, you somehow find strength in what you've gone through during the last year. You write, I know this trauma is everlasting, that it may well be passed on to my children, but this pain is also a force that will empower me for the rest of my life. We're going to ask you a bit later to talk more about We Are Not Numbers, but tell us now about some of the other work you've been doing over the last year to advocate for Palestinians. What has been keeping you busy and going?
Well, unfortunately, I'm someone who can't say no to anything. And when I lost my family, I decided that I will never stay silent, and I started immediately posting and writing about my family. And because of the gravity of what happened to me and to my family, so many people started like asking me to speak at events, to speak to the media, and I never said no. And I believe that I was privileged in a way because I lost 21 members of my family. The suffering is huge, but I am not the only Palestinian who lost family members. There are thousands and thousands of Palestinians in Gaza who lost multiple family members, who are going through 100 times worse than what I'm going through. And I said, okay, I lost a lot of people. I need the time to stay at home, just to cry, just to weep, to remember to grieve for my family. But at the same time, I am privileged in a way that I have internet connection. I have electricity and power, and I am in a free country where I can, I think, a free country where I can speak up, speak loud without having to be bombed for my work. So I said, I will just dedicate my life to talk about my family, to talk about my people, and talk about Palestine and Gaza. Because if I don't do that, then I am complicit. Because God gave me like at least the language to speak, the electricity. You know, for people in Gaza, like for the past year, they don't have electricity. They can't just charge their phone and then speak to the media and speak at events. So I have been every day. I go to an event here or there, not only in the UK but all around the world. I have traveled the world during the past few months, speaking at every conference I can find, speaking at speaking to any media I am invited to. That's why I agreed to speak to all of the mainstream media. I never said no, because I believe that I have a responsibility, and this responsibility, I must fulfill it. I must shoulder it, because if I don't, then I will be complicit. But also at the same time, I'm losing my family and what's happening in Gaza. It gave me a purpose for my life. And we all, as a human, as people, we always think that life can be meaningful if you are fighting for a noble cause, if you are doing something very noble. And nothing is more noble than fighting for the Palestinians in Gaza who are under besiegement, who are under bombardment, who are under genocide. So that what happened to me and what happened to my family gave my life a purpose. And I have always fought for Palestinians. I have always spoke for the Palestinians, but now this purpose is very, very, very clear. It's very determined. I will not do anything in my life except for talking for the Palestinians and speaking about my family. I will keep speaking about my father, my brothers, my sisters, my nieces, my nephews, my people, my hometown, Gaza and Deir al-Balah. And this is what I will be living for, no matter what the consequences are, no matter what the blackmail and the threats are. This is what I'm going to do, and nothing will stop me. But this is not because I'm strong. I'm not strong. Do you know who are the strong people? The strong people who are in Gaza, who are reporting the truth to power under the drones, under the bombardment, who know that they will be eventually killed for their reporting, for their stories, for their voice, and they're still speaking, like Anas al-Sharif and the journalists of Al Jazeera, who Israel identified like militants. And they know that this is a message that Israel is going after them, but they still continue to report and tell the truth. These are the powerful people. The powerful and the strong people are the children in Gaza, who are still surviving the bombardment and who are still hopeful that one day Palestine will be free, and still doing what they can in order to survive and support their family. We are not strong. We are privileged, Ali. No matter what we do from this safe country, this privileged country, with a freedom of movement and speaking, not very much freedom of speech, but we are privileged here. And no matter what we do, that doesn't say that we are strong. But if we are silent, then we are cowards. And I don't want to be a coward person. This is the last thing I want, is to give Israel the pleasure to kill us, and we are silent. I will never be silent, because if I am silent, then I am complicit, then I have betrayed my family.
Talk about you do a podcast with Palestine Deep Dive. Tell us briefly about that. What do you tell us? What is Palestine Deep Dive for those who don't know, and talk about the work you're doing with them.
Yeah, of course. I'm very proud to work for Palestine Deep Dive. It's a very small media organization that started a few years ago, but then after the genocide, we tried to change what we are doing. So basically, Palestine Deep Dive is a space or a media organization that gives the Palestinians in the UK the platform, the space to come and speak their mind out and clear without any censorship. So what we do a podcast. Like I'm sitting in our office space here, and we do a podcast. We host Palestinians, or if I don't, I host Palestinians, and I ask them to tell their stories to the world in English, in a language that the world understands, in a language that they can say. But if I'm not interviewing Palestinians, then I am a Palestinian. I get to invite people to come to our studio and ask them questions about Palestine. So it is, we consider it as a space, safe place for the Palestinians in the UK to come and speak up and tell their stories to the world in a language that the world understands. And I am very, very proud of that. I joined Palestine Deep Dive in February this year, and ever since I have been doing some podcasts and some videos, and these videos and these podcasts got millions of views, literally. And this tells you a lot. And this is what we do. We do stuff like you do, Electronic Intifada. We complete each other. There is a lot of thirst for Palestinian voices here in the UK and in the West. The media, the mainstream media, have long oppress the Palestinian voices, dehumanize the Palestinian voices, demonize the Palestinian people. We were never given a space, safe environment in the media, in the mainstream media, so that we can speak and tell our stories and talk about what happens to our lives. So what we do now is that we're trying to create a platform, an alternative platform, so that the Palestinians can feel safe when they speak to the media, exactly like what you are doing in the Electronic Intifada, which is really, really powerful. So we don't do written content. Mainly we do podcasts, YouTube shows, and we have been helping Palestinians speak up for the first time. I'm very proud of some of the work that we have done. I'm very proud of a podcast that I recorded with Hala Abu Libda, a Palestinian from Gaza, who called me a few months ago, and she asked me how I'm doing, and I asked her why, and she said she had the same story like my story. She lost all of her family members in Gaza, and she did not know what to do. So I encouraged her to come and to tell her stories, to tell her story and what happened to her family. I'm very, very proud that we help Palestinians come to this space and speak and tell their stories to the world. This podcast was watched by hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions. Like our clips got millions of views, and millions of people listened to her story. They watched her, they saw her speak from her heart, and nothing is more powerful than someone telling their story to the world.
You should be proud. It is fantastic and essential work that you're all doing at Palestine Deep Dive, and and as well, we are not numbers. This fantastic organization that was we'll get into that in a few minutes, but that was co-founded by our good friend 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. Ahmed, for all of us, it's difficult to feel that the work we're doing is having an impact. When we see so much new horror every day, no end in sight. The one thing that people in Gaza and Lebanon need most, obviously, is an end to this genocide. But all of our protests still haven't achieved that. The governments in North America and Europe remain as firmly committed to their unconditional support and abetting to Israel as ever. But and many Arab regimes sadly act the same way. Obviously, we're not going to give up. But what are some of the positive signs you've seen over the last year that keep you motivated to keep doing this work?
Nora, we don't have an option.
Hmm.
We don't have a choice
Yeah.
but to keep going. And I know that the moment that we despair, the moment we say, okay, we failed. And sometimes I have these moments. I'm a human after all. I'm not always very strong, very powerful. Sometimes I have these moments of despair. But I always remember and remind myself, and I'm very lucky to have people around me who keep reminding me that it's not over yet. And sometimes it feels that the situation is very bleak, very dark. Yes, it is very bleak. It's very dark. What is worse than a genocide? And genocide has been inflicted on the people in Palestine. And we have lost so many people, and we are still losing so many people. And no matter how much we protest here in the UK or in the US, nothing changes. Sometimes we feel that we're screaming into the void, that no one hears us, that no one cares about us. And sometimes it's the truth. Unfortunately, we, the Palestinians, we're looked down at. Like our lives don't matter to some people, especially to the people in power. Our life don't matter to them. And no matter how Israel kills. And sometimes I wonder, what else should Israel do so that the West changes their policy about Palestine? A genocide, they have committed a genocide. Using starvation as a weapon of war, they have done that. Banning UNRWA, for God's sake, banning UNRWA, they have done that. They have killed journalists, more journalists than the entire 20 years. They have done every atrocity you could think of, killing children, beheading children. They did. And the UK and the US and their intelligence and all of these people, they know exactly what Israel is doing. It's not a secret. It's not like a matter of lack of information. They know what's happening. They know that the weapons that they send to Israel are going to be used to decapitate babies, to destroy families, like my family. They know all of that. But they know that but now we know that they are part of the problem. The UK and the US, they were never neutral to Israel and Palestine. They are part of the problem. And now we know more than ever that Israel is, yes, it is the colonial project of the West. But at the same time, we know that it's very dark, very bleak, very difficult. The situation is very difficult. Sometimes it feels like there's no hope in the horizon. But I know that we can't stop. Because the moment we stop, the moment we despair, that moment Israel wins. As long as we are fighting, they will not win. And I have to say, we are doomed with Israel, and Israel is doomed with us. We will never leave Israel alone. Israel can kill, yes, they can kill all of the people in Gaza. They can kill all the people in Palestine. But we will always be there. We, the Palestinians who are outside, we will always be there. We will keep fighting Israel for the last breath. And we, the Palestinians who are outside, we're fighting Israel in our own way. We're fighting Israel in words. And words are very powerful. And Israel will never get rid of us. Even if they kill the Palestinians in Gaza, the Palestinians outside Gaza will keep talking about Israel. If they come and kill me and kill you and kill Noura, then our friends and our supporters and the pro-Palestine activists will keep on. And they will talk and talk and talk. Israel will never get rid of us. They're doomed with us. And we will never die. We will never just evaporate. We will never go away. We will be there. And Israel knows that. And as long as I am alive, and as long as I am breathing, and as long as people like you are breathing and alive, we will never let Israel get away with it. We will never let Israel get away with genocide. No matter what they do, they can after me, they can come after you. But this is not going to work. Genocides have happened before, but the perpetrators never got away with it. They will never get away with it. They will never get away with killing children and women and men and young men. They will never get away with that. And the last thing I want from my life is for me as Ahmed, to be complicit in that. I will never let Israel get away with the murder of my family. And so many Palestinians will have the same vision.
And we understand it may take time, but we will never give it up. I echo that sentiment completely. And Ahmed, you, through your own example and through the work you do, have really emphasized the importance of Palestinians telling their stories. And in the last few minutes we have with you, I want to talk about We Are Not Numbers. You're the director of this extraordinarily important initiative that you co-founded a decade ago to mentor young people in Gaza to write their stories and share them with the world. And of course, as Nora mentioned, another co-founder was our dear friend, Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 who, of course, was himself murdered by Israel last December 6th. We Are Not Numbers has mentored hundreds of young writers, and many of them write for the Electronic Intifada, so we're deeply indebted to you. Please give us an update on the work We Are Not Numbers is doing right now, and what are some of the ways people can get involved and support the writers?
You know, Ali, it's really interesting that during the time of war, especially during times of war, the number of writers who join We Are Not Numbers has tripled and increased massively. The number of stories that we publish increased massively during the genocide. You know, we started We Are Not Numbers 10 years ago with the help of 𝐓𝐡 𝐞𝐿 and Pam Bailey and Dr. Rami Abdo and many others. So it wasn't only me, it was a group of people. And we started with the training 20 writers in 2015, 20 writers. And we said that's a good number. Now we have trained more than 500 writers, not only from Gaza, from the West Bank, from Lebanon, from the Palestinians all around the world. And now during this genocide, more and more writers come to us. And I have to say that we are not writers. Like the writers who join We Are Not Numbers are not really writers. They're not established authors. They're not as good writers as you, Ali, Abu Ni'ma, and Noura. But they are Palestinians. They're young Palestinians. And what we do when We Are Not Numbers is that we train them how to write. We train them to be good writers. And we were surprised with We Are Not Numbers is that these Palestinians, these young people are very talented. They just need their chance. They just need their opportunity, and they will do wonders. Some of the stories that they wrote for We Are Not Numbers are amazing. They're going to be a testimony. And I know now when we started We Are Not Numbers, for me personally, I said, okay, we want to write in English because we want to educate the world, because we want to stop the dehumanization of the Palestinians. But now after everything that's going through, that happened to Gaza, I feel that our strength in We Are Not Numbers is that we are recording history. We are recording history. And even if the world doesn't see or read our stories right now, and they do, by the way, we have a huge readership in We Are Not Numbers, but we are writing to history now. The stories that we are writing now, they will be read in 100 or 200 years from now. And the stories and the writing and the words of the young writers in Gaza, who are 17 and 18 and 19 years old during a genocide, when they write their diaries, their thoughts, their ideas, what happens around them, this will be for history. This will be immortal forever. And this is what I am very, very proud of. Maybe I'm not writing for the people here and now to read. I'm writing for a better generation to come. Because I'm telling you, we have been failed from these generations. But I have a huge hope that future generations, they will read our stories and they will understand what really happened during the genocide. Now, if you go to We Are Not Numbers website, we publish thousands of stories, not hundreds, over the past 10 years. Everything you need to know about Gaza, you will find a story written about it in We Are Not Numbers. You will find young men, young women, you will find poetry, you will find features, you will find opinion stories, you'll find all kind of types of stories written from young people in Gaza. And yes, we are Palestinians as well. We lost 4 of our writers. That's latest story by Majd Salim. It was about one of our writers who was killed during the war. We lost 4 of our writers. We lost one of our mentors. But we never stopped, and we will never stop. And by the way, we will have a new design and new logo that was inspired by 𝐓𝐡 𝐞𝐿's story, by 𝐓𝐡 𝐞𝐿's poem, If I Must Die. So on the 1st of November, you will find a new design for our website and a new logo for We Are Not Numbers, because we want to immortalize the poem that was written by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, If I Must Die. And next year we will have 2 books. We will release 2 books that are collections of stories from We Are Not Numbers. We have done documentaries, but most importantly, we have trained writers. And we think that writing a story is very therapeutic. And our writers are now writing because it is very therapeutic to them, and because it educates the world about what's happening in Gaza. And it will also be history. History will be written from these stories that we are writing. And recently, we were very, very lucky to have some few people who have now donated some money so that we can pay our writers. So for the first time in history, now we are paying these writers like a small amount of money so that they can survive in Gaza. We understand that the financial situation in Gaza is very, very difficult. So we have been lucky that some of our supporters are now donating little money so that we can support our writers. So this is something else. People who want to help We Are Not Numbers, they can share our stories, share our message, read our stories, and if they can donate to We Are Not Numbers so that we can pay our writers in Gaza, that will be great.
Ahmed, that's tremendously important. I can't emphasize enough the revolutionary work that We Are Not Numbers has been doing and is doing. And I'm not exaggerating when I say, I don't know the exact number, but probably most of our writers in Gaza have come to us through We Are Not Numbers, or after being mentored by We Are Not Numbers. And the only thing we feel embarrassed about is sometimes we have more stories than we are physically capable of editing and publishing. That's a real testament to how successful you've been. And we also believe that these stories are, yes, they play an important role now. We're always encouraging people, share the stories now so people know what's happening. But we believe that these stories together, that you are publishing at We Are Not Numbers and at other publications and at the Electronic Intifada, are part of history, that they are a unique archive of, sadly, that we have to make, because we cannot count on the mainstream media or whoever it is to write the history accurately. So it is of tremendous value what you're doing, and it's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that you are now able to pay some of the writers. This is very important. We also pay the writers in Gaza. It's a major part of what we do, because it's a lifeline for many people at this point. I mean, their work is work in any case, and it deserves to be supported. But particularly now, it's absolutely critical. So that's thank you for telling us that. And I know that there are people who will want to support what We Are Not Numbers is doing, and they'll be able to find out more ways to do that at the wearenotnumbers.org website. So it's really wonderful. Ahmed, I can't tell you how much it's meant to us for you to join us today, to speak about your family, to speak about telling their story and the importance of doing that. And as I said, it was difficult enough to read your story and to hear you speak about your family, much less to go through what you've gone through. So we just, on behalf of all of us and all who are watching, we just want to embrace you and embrace your family and tell you how much we love you and support you and appreciate what you're doing. And just to remind people, you are, of course, the director and co-founder of We Are Not Numbers. You also write for the New Arab. Perhaps you'll also share some stories with us at the Electronic Intifada. We would love that. And you write for other publications. And of course, you do a tremendously important work in terms of the podcast and the videos you publish with Palestine Deep Dive as well. Ahmed, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you'll come back again soon.
No, thank you very, very much for having me. I have always admired the work that you do for Electronic Intifada. So thank you for what you're doing for Palestine. It's very, very important, and you're making history. We're making history.
Well, and you're right. We have no choice. It's our honor. It's our responsibility, and it's our duty. But there's no conceivable alternative. We're never going to give up and just stop. And thank you for reinforcing that in us today, Ahmed. And we wish you all the best, and we hope to see you very soon.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Oh, it was very emotional.
Yeah.
He's extraordinary, just extraordinary. What a incredible writer, and what a beautiful man. Really glad that we could have him on.
And you know what we're in such an unprecedented, at least for a situation where whole families are just being wiped out all the time, and we don't have ways of talking about that, or for people who are going through that to be able to comprehend it. Ahmed talked about how difficult it is to understand even the loss of, to your own family members, but to lose one person is hard enough, but to lose 20 or 30 or 40 of so many people. So I just admire Ahmed for the way he's been talking about his family, because I think that's important in itself, and to remember them. But I hope also that it's a way for other Palestinians who are going through the same thing to have a way to see how they can start to navigate this just unbearable, horrific situation.
Indeed. Yeah. And thanks for, pointing out that this is the duty. We get, I think, rightly so, there's a way in which, us at the Electronic Intifada and people in the wider, Palestine solidarity movement, get very paralyzed, when we see all of the work that we're doing and our movement is doing, and that Palestinians in Palestine are doing, and it not being able to stop this rogue, genocide state. I think it becomes really important also to remember that everything that we are doing is making a difference in the long run, in terms of documenting history, in terms of not letting this genocide state be the one that writes the history. And I think, first and foremost, the Palestinians inside Palestine, inside Gaza specifically, are doing, are at the forefront, obviously, of that work, and to be able to be in community with people like Ahmed and the writers with We Are Not Numbers and Palestine Deep Dive is an incredible honor and incredible responsibility. So yeah, I'm really glad that we had him. Yeah. Well, speaking of duty and responsibility, let's bring on John to talk about the Palestinian and Lebanese resistance to this genocide state, to this rogue apartheid enemy. There was a lot happening, obviously, again, especially in northern Gaza, and obviously in Lebanon as well, and in the West Bank. So, John, tell us what we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, well, we're going to start in southern Gaza again, as we usually do this week, but we'll go all the way up to Lebanon by the end and get you all up to date on what's been happening for the last week.
Great. Well, thanks.
Thanks for having Ahmed on. That was really powerful, and he's doing incredible work under really unbelievable circumstances. So,
Thank you, John.
Thanks. All right, we'll take it away.
All right. Well, as I said, this is going to be the first resistance report in 6 months that we're not starting in Rafah. The IDF's operations in Rafah are limited to the Philadelphia corridor and the combat outposts along there that they have created. Of course, we saw last week in the coverage of Yahya Sinwar's death that the troops are still there, but they're not moving in the city and not carrying out operations in Rafah. So it makes sense that we're not seeing resistance videos for the first time in 6 weeks from that battle space. But let's take a look at the Gaza maps as we usually do to start. And as Nora said in her excellent news report, again, the attacks are happening all across Gaza. I've said this a number of times over these months. I'm going to focus on battle spaces and resistance spaces. But the civilian population in Gaza is subjected to aerial attack and artillery shelling anywhere they are in the Gaza Strip. There was attacks in all major cities and camps all across Gaza. They're attacking even in the Mawasi safe area. So that is still going on. There's more than 40 airstrikes a day in Gaza. That is a consistent number that has been happening for many months. It spiked a bit during the siege on Jabalia, which we'll get to, but I just want to point that out, that that's happening across Gaza, regardless of the particular areas that we focus in. So there's the Philadelphia corridor that we talked about, and that's where the Israeli positions are. We know from Yahya Sinwar and his last stand battle at Tel Sultan. There's an outpost there in Tel Sultan. There's another outpost between Tel Sultan and the Rafah crossing. And then, of course, in the south, the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is at the far bottom of that map that you see south of the Rafah crossing. That is the aid crossing that has been cut virtually off. And as we'll talk about in the north, aid to the north is completely cut off and has been for a 3-week siege, as Nora said. So looking up north, that's where we're going to focus this week. The Netzarim corridor you see there that has divided the Gaza Strip in half. The Netzarim corridor is, and I hope I say this every week, if I forget, it's not because it didn't happen. Every single week, the Netzarim corridor is targeted literally daily by the Joint Operations Room resistance factions with artillery, with mortar fire on the command positions along the Netzarim corridor. There was 50,000 people displaced from the north, from Jabalia and Beit Hanun. The people, only a small handful of people actually crossed through the checkpoints in the Netzarim corridor. People in the north did not leave the north. They remain in the north, but they were displaced. And this week has been a devastating week as a human being to watch what's going on in Gaza. Israel even prompted NPR, not exactly the most champion of Palestinian rights, wrote that the 3-week siege in the north has turned all of Gaza into a frontline killing zone. And that killing zone, as I described a few weeks back when this operation began under the justification by the IDF that people were going to the shelters and to the shelters that were in hospitals. The other shelters are in schools for the most part. But the shelters in the hospitals are also a critical part out in the courtyards, as we know from all of the hospital attacks across Gaza over the last 13 months. And so that happened in Jabalia and Kamal Adwan Hospital. Nora talked a little bit about that in her report. Everybody was marched out of Kamal Adwan Hospital. Israeli special forces took over the hospital. They detained all men and boys over the age of 13 years old. They put them all through scans, face scans, iris scans, and many staff and doctors were disappeared. We saw brutal pictures of stripped men in a crowd of humanity. Those people were taken from shelters. They were taken from the hospital courtyards. They were taken from the hospitals themselves. And the reason was, the justification was that there was some government organization happening inside these shelters where the IDF said people came to pick up food stamps, humanitarian equipment, and to complain about crime. That was the justification for the massacre the besiegement of the north of Gaza, where the civil defense said not a loaf of bread, not a drop of water has entered in 3 weeks of this siege. More than 1,200 people have been killed in Jabalia alone in this time. As you see on the news, if you watch the right news, you see many times in massacres of 100 and more people dropping not just entire apartments, but entire apartment blocks, entire neighborhoods, street after street being attacked. It's been unbelievable what we watch, and the courage of the people in northern Gaza during this time. I'm going to talk about the resistance, but I want to always start with the resistance of the people who are going through this and who refuse to leave, even under Israeli orders. The displacement of 50,000 people from the shelters did not mean 50,000 people fled the north. According to the most up-to-date UN numbers, less than 100 people left the north in this time. 600 people were arrested in emptying out those shelters. And after the shelters were emptied, Israeli forces burned the shelters, and they reported that in their media. The Israeli Defense Forces reported that in their field reports. They weren't hiding it. They burned the shelters after they cleared them out, and they've already destroyed the other schools that weren't being shelters. They were destroyed earlier in the war. So it's a devastating situation in the north. And when we go to watch these resistance videos coming up, I want to just say that Haaretz reported, Israel's liberal daily reported this week, that IDF soldiers saw battle plans and got troop leading procedures that were framed around the general's plan, which is essentially to starve the Gaza Strip, force people to surrender, or they die. That is the essential general's plan. There's some that we talked about last week about the attempts to resettle. I don't give much credibility, but the plan to force starvation on the population until they surrender or die is what we're seeing. And so just to tee up the videos, you're going to see that is not, there is no surrendering happen, not from any demographic in Gaza. And least of all, in this case, what we're going to see with the fighters. So let's start at number 1 here. This is east of Jabalia city. You can see a fighter here moving in a building that's right on a road that has been pre-scouted by intelligence that as a tank route. He's hopping back. He's already carried the Shawaz device and he's wired it. So when he's coming back in that scene, he's already carried the wire, and you can see the wire in front of him. You can see the detonator, and here comes a tank rolling down the road, a Merkava tank, and we have blurred this because the soldier is hanging out of the tank, he's riding outside the hatch of the tank, which is not going to go well, as you can see. And you can see in this, they're going to re-show it. You can see it blow the wall completely out of that building and send it into the air. It's an enormous explosion by a Qassam-designed explosively formed penetrator, the Shawaz. And the Shawaz is going to be the main character. There's the wall. The Shawaz is going to be the main character in this week's show. What we're seeing here is one of 13 Shawaz attacks against Israeli tanks, just in Jabalia, just in the last 7 days since you've seen me last. 8 soldiers have been killed. And this is just by Shawaz. So you can see him there waiting. He's in position, waiting for the moment to strike. After he sets it up, the soldier comes rolling in here. And in the audio track, the soldier sees something and starts firing right about there. You can see that puff of smoke. The tank-mounted machine gun fires on that building. But because the fighter is back, you saw him moving through the rubble. He's not in that spot when it gets fired on. And so that's obviously a devastating attack. It's not always exactly clear which incident the Israeli soldiers died in. They often delay announcing them. But that was a very significant operation that you saw there. So let's look at number 2. This is a detailed ambush. We might have to go through this one a couple times because it's really interesting. First of all, to notice, if you look on the left top, at the top there, you can see that newly spun tandem 85, and you can see how that weapon is made to take the old 85 millimeter warhead that is no longer useful and to add the secondary charge to it to make it a tandem charge. You can see by the fact that those are not painted that those are being manufactured. Those have been manufactured since the last invasion of Jabalia in May. You can see the fighter holding an older one there, a more standard Yasin 105, and you can see they're painted and the painting has been marked. This guy's hammering the wall, and he's directly saying, he directly refers to the general's plan when he's doing that. He says, the general's plan, huh? As he's swinging that sledgehammer, he says, consider this the head of your soldiers. This guy's coming out to plant one of the shawads. There's multiple shawads being planted. Again, no audio track, trying to keep these videos up. That there's gunfire, tank fire through all of these movements as the fighters set up this ambush. It's an ambush of a convoy of D9 armored bulldozers. These fighters are getting into position. Interesting. We'll play it one more time so I can give you all the details of the dialogue that happens within the video. But this is being carried out by a task force group within the Qassam brigades called the Martyr Hadiya unit. So they're already naming their task force units. There they spot a Namr troop carrier from a distance. The troop carrier is leading the way and the tank follows up. They're going to fire on the tank with that tandem 85 that you saw. This looks a bit like an interception from the trophy system. It's fired from a far distance. It's difficult to tell, but it looks a bit like an intercept. So these fighters are saying that they're planning the operation. They say that this operation will be for the sacrifice of all the martyrs of the Jabalia camp, our people of steadfastness. He said that they are patient and steadfast on their land, and we draw our strength from them. The fighters say, we draw our strength from them. This guy with the Yasin is heading out he's on lookout. He's the spotter for the armored convoy of D9 bulldozers that are carrying with them explosive barrels to destroy houses more cheaply. We saw them do it with anti-tank weapons earlier in the war. Now they're doing it with massive barrel bombs. But as you can see, they detonate. You can see there, that's the D9 bulldozer in the convoy. Multiple vehicles were hit in that convoy by those shawads that were set up. And here we see trophy D9 bulldozers left behind. That bulldozer is flipped right over, and the fighter points that out. He says, here are the Qassam Brigade's fighters flipping over D9 bulldozers in Gaza with glory, which has always been the graveyard of invaders. And this guy says the same thing. We're going to burn it, and he burns the D9 armored bulldozer. So we're going to watch it just one more time, and I'll give you even more details on this, because this is a very detailed operation. These fighters are fighting these operations. So here the fighters are predicting the route of the vehicles again. So because of intelligence, surveillance, and drones, target acquisition through the use of tactical drones. If you look in the foreground of that, there's 2 grenades. Those are Qassam-built hand grenades. You look at the top of the screen there, you see Qassam-built tandem charge anti-tank weapons, building their own weapons, which has been the theme throughout this whole war. All of the weapons that you see used in these battles are built by Qassam. This fighter is holding Qassam weapons, saying that they are preparing the operation. And in that troop leading brief, the commander said, where we expect to meet them in the killing zone, there is a convoy of bulldozers, which we expect to be carrying heavy explosive devices, which will target and set off a chain reaction through the vehicles. So there's the Shawat device being set up. And again, I told you there's gunfire in the background here. He's setting it up, disguising it, moving through the streets, through the devastated terrain, as the Israeli military calls this type of battle space. As you can see, there's lots of places for the fighters to hide and move when the buildings are destroyed like this, and lots of places to hide the devices that are so devastating, killing batches of soldiers all week. 8 soldiers killed this week alone, just since you last saw me do this report. So these fighters, you can see the tandem there, tandem 85, with the freshly manufactured tip to make the second charge. So that's an interesting fact. We haven't actually seen too much direct evidence of seeing new Yasin's warheads in the field, But it's interesting because, of course, Jabalia was the site of a major invasion, a month-long invasion back in May, which was the second invasion of Jabalia. So they need to restock their forces, and they're able to apparently do it locally and not have to pass these devices around. This fighter's going up with his Yasin to monitor the troops. You can hear the track of the vehicle, of the tanks and the bulldozers. You can hear the track squeaking, and he tells them to detonate from that fire position. And he's targeting these two D9 bulldozers. And watching this explosion, when they pause this explosion, you can see clearly the D9 right there. That's the top of the D9. So these operations, and it's one of the things that's amazing about these operations, is that we're watching real video filmed by the fighters, essentially giving us the frontline view with that tank flipped upside down, that bulldozer flipped upside down, something that we haven't quite seen in that way before. So very interesting operation in Sawafti roundabout, which is in the very south of Jabalia, just basically on the border of northern Gaza City. So this is the southernmost area of Jabalia refugee camp for this battle. And the resistance is so fierce. We can go to the photos now. The resistance is so fierce that the Israelis are not coming back and taking their bulldozers. So what you're seeing right there is the burned out bulldozer. That bulldozer is going to stay in Jabalia for the next generation to look at, because Israel doesn't leave trophies like this behind. It's very interesting to see this. They normally would blow it up from the air. They may still do that. But to see those tanks, because Israel's tanks are used as monuments, both inside Israel, but also for people who have been to South Lebanon, their tanks are monuments in South Lebanon. In the 2006 war in South Lebanon, Israel literally dragged the vehicles down the mountain, and that was something that you could literally see carved into the mountain, because the flipped tanks were dragged on their heads back home, just so Hezbollah couldn't put them in the museum. So again, detailed operation. We'll go to the next one. That was a detailed operation being carried out by fighters that we were told, that the Israelis told didn't exist multiple times. This is Saraya Al-Quds, Islamic Jihad fighters. And this is interesting to note, because these fighters have one RPG-7 with a single charged warhead. This is not a tandem. They have one Yasin 105 tandem charge, and they're going to identify that tank there. And you can see the two of them here. They're going to do a combo shot, something we haven't seen all that much of. I try to point it out every time we do see it, because I think I get a lot of comments about it, that people wonder why they don't do this tactic more often. And you're going to see, interestingly, he fires the 85 millimeter single warhead first, and then the Yasin fires second. And that's what's happening in here. And he dedicates this action as he's firing. He says, "This is my sniper operation." In jest, because to say he's an archer, he's not a sniper. So an archer saying this is my sniper operation, because he's going to hit it. He's not going to miss. And he says, "Our camp, Jabalia camp, the camp of steadfastness, for we are blessed. We are the brothers of Saraya Al-Quds and the brothers of Yahya Sinwar." A lot of these operations were shouting out Yahya Sinwar this week, of course, not unsurprisingly, by all factions. We can go to the next one, including Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade factions. This is an Israeli troop position. You can see the curtains there. In an otherwise completely destroyed building, they've got curtains on every window that they're in. This is small arms firing on them. We cut out the soldier. He comes to the window, soldier in a window, 13 months on. He comes to the window and he's hit with a thermobaric warhead. Not clear if these were the three people that were killed earlier in the week. Israel didn't line up the exact description of that, but that is a Qassam-built thermobaric warhead hitting an Israeli troop position. And just yesterday, Israel announced that, this is from a few days ago, but just yesterday they announced 4 Ghost unit soldiers in their special forces unit were killed in a booby-trapped house. So we may be seeing that operation in the coming days. That troop position being hit with a thermobaric warhead is not a pleasant experience for those on the receiving end. We can go to the next one. This is a twin Shawad. This is one of the 14 Shawad operations that happened in Gaza. they're setting it up. The fighters setting it up here, both in tactical vests, which is still an interesting development. Going through the streets, again, gunfire is the soundtrack to this. We try not to put the gunfire in because it trips up the AI algorithm. They don't want gunfire. So if you want to watch these full videos, you can see them on my Twitter account at John Elmer. Simple to find. But we do the best we can on here. And he's positioning it. You can see it being wired. He's hiding it. You can see it's on the road. He's trying to place it basically an optimal distance. He's not putting it out in the sand there because the optimal distance would be seen by the tank and would be avoided. So he's putting it a little bit behind the 1.5 meters that they would ideally be situating this device. You can see him. He's putting it in a bag. This fighter across the way is doing the same thing. They wire it up, they run the wires back to a safe position, and they wait for the vehicle to come into place. And one of these operations, and then using tactical drones here for surveillance, reconnaissance, and target acquisition, which is what NATO calls it, but clearly we're seeing 𝐤𝐿 use it here. You can see the armored vehicle convoy move through. They're going to get a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 strike here from this Archer, and then you're going to see the medevac. And again, medevac well within range of an Al-Ghul sniper rifle, not being targeted. You're also going to see, here we go, the tow truck. Call the tow truck. Call the tow truck for the 70-ton Merkava tank. Predicting the routes, the Israelis announced the next day after this operation that 3 tank soldiers were killed, tank crewmen were killed in the 460th Armored Brigade, and the brigade's chief of the tank school for commanders during peacetime was one of those killed. So 3 killed, including the tank commander, in a detailed operation carried out under fire by fighters that Israel cannot defeat and has not been able to defeat. Nothing that we're seeing in these videos is showing us any sign of anything different in the previous videos. Previous videos in January, when there was the most videos, we still saw the same numbers, 4, 6, no units bigger than that. That's why when Israel says they killed 50 people or dozens in a day, fighters, we've never seen any evidence that that's possible because they operate in small units and they don't sit in a house like the Israelis with 30 of them. They don't stand in the window. They don't put curtains up with neon colors and hang them only in the windows that your troops are in. So the likelihood of getting, not chunks of soldiers, like batches of soldiers, whatever, I'm sorry for the wording, but that's what the Israelis claim they get, 40, 50, 60 in a day. It's just lies. But we do know that 1,200 at least civilians were killed in this time, many of them women and children who fled the shelters that Israel then burned. Medevacs, still not firing on the medevacs. We saw Hezbollah fire on rescue operations, but we still don't see that happening by 𝐤𝐿. Even, different religious, they're getting a different religious order than, because I guess they're assuming that those soldiers are injured soldiers, and the Prophet said not to attack wounded soldiers that are retreating. So be it. So that is the resistance in Jabalia. Again, there was more than 50 operations this week. There was 3 sniper ops, 13 Shawadh versus tanks, 7 𝐓𝐡𝐞 versus tanks, 3 thermobaric warheads versus troop positions, 9 D9 bulldozers taken out by IEDs and 𝐓𝐡𝐞s, and 5 close quarters battles. Just remarkable battle in a disgusting genocide that Israel is doubling down on in the north. Brutal to watch. I want to take a minute here to talk about the West Bank because I want to try to bring the West Bank in whenever possible. This is a series of operations in Tubas, and Tubas has been a linchpin of the northern West Bank Intifada that's been happening. These are 2 massive IEDs, the first one versus a bulldozer, but the second one that you're going to see here is even bigger, and it's versus just an armored Jeep. That armored Jeep would not do well in that operation. We'll maybe loop this a couple times, but of course the North Tulkarm, Nur Shams camp, Nablus, Balata camp, Jenin camp, that's the axis of resistance in the northern West Bank. And I'm just going to give you some numbers because the Palestinian Prisoners Club gave us some prisoner numbers since October 7th. 11,400 people have been arrested in the West Bank and Jerusalem since October 7th. Maybe we can loop that tomorrow. Yeah, give me one more shot at this. 750 kids have been arrested, 129 journalists, 58 of them in administrative detention. At least 41 Palestinian prisoners, political prisoners, were killed in prison in the West Bank in the last year. 39 of them, their bodies have not been returned. So no autopsies, no burials for their family, prisoners even when they're dead. And that's on top of 50 other bodies that died before the war that Israel hasn't given back to the families. There's been more than 5,000 from Gaza. I think that number is low because we don't have good counting on men who get taken out of these mass arrest areas. But that totals 10,100 prisoners in prison in Israel, political prisoners in Israel. That is double the number that were in prison on October 7th, double the number, 10 times the number of women that were in prison on October 7th, and 7 times the number of children that were in prison. So that is what's going on in the West Bank. Fierce resistance continues, popular resistance continues, demonstrations every day, attacks on Israeli military positions, settlers attempting to take even more land in the West Bank in the last year than was taken in the 20 years total before that, going back to the Second Intifada. So dark genocidal and land theft going on by Israel on multiple fronts here. So we're going to move to the third front, which is South Lebanon. We are now 28 days into the ground maneuver, as Israel calls it, in Lebanon. The IDF says that it has lost 70 soldiers. Hezbollah says they have killed 90 soldiers. So you're seeing roughly the same, give or take, casualty counts by both sides. We see that with Qassam as well. Qassam is never exaggerating the troops. We can see by their field reports that they match the numbers killed almost exactly. So they're telling the truth. Hezbollah, if anything, told too much truth during the pager and assassination era of mid-September to late September. But the Hezbollah organization media arm put out that they've destroyed 30 tanks, 4 D9 bulldozers, and in the last 4 days alone have carried out 103 rocket barrages. So that's not rockets, that's rocket barrages. And some of these rocket barrages are 50 to 85 rockets per barrage. They're maintaining about 200 a day rocket total, but the ground war on the border is only just creeping across the border at this point. They're maximum 3 kilometers across the border, and those 3 kilometers are forested, wooded, mountained areas. They're not going into villages. They haven't taken a single village yet. The IDF spokesperson said yesterday that they've hit 3,200 targets, airstrikes on 3,200 targets. In the past 7 days alone, Hezbollah has carried out 265 qualitative operations against Israel. And of course, this week, or just yesterday, Naim Qassem, who was Saeed Hassan Nasrallah's deputy, was named leader. And we will talk more about him in the discussion, but he's a logical choice. He was the deputy. He's a public face of Hezbollah. He's a historian of the movement. And in any case, the Shura Council makes collective leadership decisions. Things don't change based on one personality or another. And so the organization is able to withstand the loss of individual leaders because they run a collective leadership structure that we'll talk about more at the end in the discussion. So let's look at number 10 here. This is an Almas anti-tank, top attack anti-tank weapon strike. This is, again, I try to tell you this every time, but this weapon was captured in the July war in 2006 in battle. Hezbollah captured this unit and took it to Iran. Iran reverse engineered it and put it back into battle as an Almas. And this tank weapon we have been seeing is a devastating tool because it comes from above. It can be controlled. You can see the tank soldier riding outside at the top here, and they can put it through camera anywhere they want on the vehicle. This is on this day where this operation took place on Friday. There was 48 operations by Hezbollah, 48 distinct operations, which is the most they've carried out throughout the war. So the assassination of their leaders has not changed their operational tempo at all. Like I said before, 38 tanks destroyed, 4 D9 bulldozers. They've also dropped 5 Hermes drones, which we're going to watch in the upcoming videos. But this is the first of 2 Al-Mas top attack anti-tank missile strikes. And as you can see, these strikes are going across the border. These are not strikes on advanced position Israeli armor. The Israelis aren't rolling across deep into Lebanon. They haven't touched the villages with tank and maneuver warfare. They have no forward positions. These are strikes behind the lines because they're not advancing. Hezbollah has kept them back. We can do number 11. Hezbollah's defensive standoff fire has kept Israel outside of the villages right now. Fierce combat, but has kept them outside of the villages right now. The villages are being destroyed because Israel bombs them from the air and does everything that we know they do in Gaza. Artillery leads the way. They attack the civilians. This is a troop position. This is a troop position near 𝐓𝐡𝐞, and you can see the bus is unloading the soldiers coming to battle here. The bus unloads the soldiers, and immediately upon getting off the bus, you can see they see it's incoming. Immediately after getting off the bus, Hezbollah targets them. So welcome to the northern front for Israeli soldiers. And these attacks, both of these last 2 attacks, had 10 fatalities in the 2 of them, and they are reservists. So Israel can't endure long grinding war with reservists dying, which is partly what you're seeing in their statements. They're talking about, they're looking for an off-ramp in their operations. They're trying to say that we have secured the border. That they have secured the border. We can go to the next one. This is showing what I'm describing here. Israel is not advancing beyond the border. What they're doing, that's a row of tanks that you can see moving down the hill. That's another column of tanks moving down the hill. What Israel's doing is essentially securing the border. That securing the border is not the test for Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not, by UN resolution, supposed to be right on the border. And so it's not indicative of the success of their fighting group whether they protect the actual borderline, which there isn't actually a borderline. There's a nebulous buffer zone. And that's part of the reason why Israel takes credit for these cross-border attacks, that the border is not like a big, long fence along the whole border that's easy to identify. You're talking about mountained, treed areas. So we're still seeing standoff fire. We're not seeing tanks maneuvering inside Lebanon in large numbers. And when we do see that, we're going to see it on video, just like we saw those Al-Mas videos. These are the burning vehicles. And Hezbollah points out that the tank column withdrew. They withdrew back across the border. The weapons that were used here were Phalag 2 rockets, M80 fragmentation rockets. Those were the ones I showed you last week. And standard mortars. That's the footage of the vehicles driving up the hill, going back into Lebanon. They're not totally sure they want to fight this battle. Well, you watch this one again, the troops coming down the hill before they have to go back up the hill to actually fight where the defensive positions that Hezbollah has set up in villages like 𝐓𝐡𝐞. But there was an operation that the IDF explained. I'll let them explain it from their side. They said 4 reserve soldiers were killed and 6 others were wounded during a clash with Hezbollah operatives in southern Lebanon yesterday. They all served in the 222nd Battalion. According to the initial IDF report, several Hezbollah operatives emerged from a tunnel inside a house the soldiers were in and hurled grenades at them. The soldiers tried to return fire, but it remains unclear if they hit anybody. The Hezbollah fighters returned back to the tunnel with 4 killed Israeli soldiers, 6 wounded, 3 in serious condition. And that operation, that's a shout out to 2006. That's what happened, and that's what ended the operation in 2006, Israel's ground war. they came up and they thought they were holding a house like they do in the West Bank, like they do in Gaza. Those 4 that were killed in Gaza today are trying to hold a house, and they were killed by fighters coming up from a tunnel in the basement. So, and number 13 here is Hezbollah downing. I'm bringing you all a range of operations. There's many more of these operations. I'm just trying to show you a range of operations here. This is an Elbit Hermes 450 drone. Hezbollah's air defense unit hit this with a man-portable air defense system. That's a shoulder-fired system, like an 𝐓𝐡𝐞 probably is the most likely one that was used for this. Again, it's an Elbit systems here, flaming and falling to the ground. This is one of 5 in the past 8 days that they have shot down, and there was 10 of those before the war. So they're able to get these drones. They're able to deny area denial these drones, these expensive drones. These are the flagship drones. The 450 is not the flagship. The 900 is the flagship. That's what they got today. But they're able to drop these drones. They're still not showing us the weapon that they're using at this point to do that. And previously, they hadn't even showed us the moment of impact because they're trying to hide what missile is being used. So interesting, dropping drones consistently. Number 14 here is also interesting. This is a warning that was sent out to Israelis in the nature of the way that Israelis do it. They're pointing to each of these settlements: Kiryat Shmona, Carmel, Nahariya, Shumera, Shaul, Maron, and on and on and on. And each of these, they're showing you these particular spot in each of these villages through their surveillance. They're showing you that these are military positions inside these settlements, which in Kiryat Shmona and Metula, I showed you previously on these shows, 60 Minutes, taking you into Metula and showing you how the military positions are set up within these evacuated villages, these settlements. And so they're showing you here all across the northern border and all up in the panhandle. It says, to all residents of the settlements mentioned in this statement, you are all requested to evacuate immediately. Your settlements have become a place of deployment and position of military forces attacking Lebanon. As a result, they have become legitimate military targets for the air and missile force of the Islamic resistance. So remarkable there. And we're firing, Hezbollah is firing, we're seeing them fire again, 150 to 200 rockets a day, barrages that are 50 to 80 at a time. Iron Dome cannot handle 125 rockets at a time, especially not from multiple sites. So these are still, Hezbollah is still playing it careful. They're trying not to draw Israel into an open war. But they're definitely defeating Israel's advance. Israel is not advancing even by their own statements. Their own statements say that they are 1 or 2 kilometers across the border where possible. They moved up a little further in 𝐓𝐡𝐞, which is further up the border. So I'm looking at a map over here. Little further up the border, there's more space between the border and 𝐓𝐡𝐞, so they moved maybe 4 kilometers up in that region. But they're not. They're right along the border. They're not moving into South Lebanon. So let's look at number 15. This was another qualitative operation that we're seeing. I showed you these a while back. These underground missile bases. The Imad-4 is what I showed you. Here's a Qadr ballistic missile, precision-guided ballistic missile. You can see Fuad Shukr, who is the head of the missile force, and Abu Hadi martyr posters there. So firing from underground, truck-launched missile bases on Tel Aviv with a 405 kilogram warhead and a 250 kilometer range. These are game-changing weapons that, were they to be deployed en masse, which they are not being right now, are game-changing. They're precision-guided. Hezbollah engineers indicate within 5 meters is their target range. There you can see Abu Hadi and Fuad Shukr in those pictures. So these are a qualitative upgrade of arsenal and to fire on targets in Tel Aviv. This was fired on Mossad and Unit 8200 at the Glilot military base that people are now coming familiar with. And on number 16, this is a rocket barrage. And it's interesting to see this because you can see why the rocket barrages are difficult to deal with in counterfire when they come out of the trees like this. That's how you see how you get missile barrages of 80 and 125. You launch 3 of those 3 of those guys, and that's how you get it. And look, it just emerges from the trees. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that Hezbollah maintains only some 20% rocket and missile capability that it had before the war. I estimate the remaining capacity of missiles and rockets to be on the order of 20%. It is also not organized in a way that it can be organized in a way that Hezbollah could fire large volleys. That's what he said this week, on a week that Hezbollah fired volleys of 125, 85, and 50 repeatedly, day after day. So they're living in a world where Israel's living in a world where they're talking to their audience about limiting the war in Lebanon. They're not talking right now. None of their statements sound like they have the stomach for a protracted ground war against Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is playing it still pretty carefully because they haven't needed to attack the tank columns that come up. But those Al-Mas, the dual Cornet anti-tank missile that are mounted on quads, on four-wheelers, those are tank killers. And Hezbollah has many, many of those. So when you see what you will see with a large-scale mechanized invasion and maneuver in Lebanon is you'll see tank killers hitting the tanks in large numbers. The 38 that they're talking about right now, yeah, we can go to the next one, is a series of drone operations. But just to say, there's been 12,500 sirens in Israel because of rocket fire. When we see large tank movements come across the border, we're going to see videos of many tanks being killed because or at least demobilized, but probably killed because these are tank killer weapons. They're much stronger, much more penetrative than the Yasin, and we know the Yasin destroys tanks. We know the Shawad destroys tanks. So these are drone launches. There was more than 200 drones launched in battle since the late September, since the beginning of what Israel calls the ground op. So we're showing you here a handful of 200 drones that have been fired in battle. These all look like Shahad series drones. There you see the military vehicles behind the border. These are attacks inside Israel. So they're defending Lebanon, but they're attacking Israeli positions inside Israel. Israel does not have forward positions inside Lebanon yet. Still, 28 days into the war, they're unable to set up forward positions. Anytime they're moving across the border, they're moving delicately, and they're not setting up forward positions like I just described in Jabalia that killed the soldiers in Jabalia, where they tried to take over a house. That's not happening in the villages like 𝐓𝐡𝐞 that you would be looking for, or of course much bigger villages like Bint Jbeil that are ready for battle and are fortified. The border itself is not fortified, and that is because Hezbollah followed the rules of the UN, of the ceasefire of 2006, and they're not supposed to be permanently on the border. So the fact that Israel can roll a kilometer or two across the border is not an indication of the success or failure of the resistance. The indication is when they fight in the villages, which we haven't seen yet. And if we do see it, I think we're going to get a lot of videos showing what we're seeing here. The final one of these drone operations was, these are targeting military positions. You could see the military positions. These are military positions inside these settlements in the north. One of them, Sasa. So shout out, that's a ethnically cleansed Palestinian village of our friends. So shout out to Sasa, maybe. But here we're seeing BAZ. This is a Israeli aerospace making fighter jet metal. And Hezbollah puts a drone swarm. See, you're going to see multiple drones launched here. Put it through the roof of that military industrial site in just between Akka and Haifa, just on the downslope from Haifa. And they put it through the roof of that building. You can see multiple drones going up. The only way to shoot down these drones for Israel is to deploy fighter jets or attack helicopters and literally shoot them down. And usually the way they're seen is not on radar. It's seen by people in these forward bases that are literally yelling, "There's a drone," and pointing to it. And they fly low and slow, and they're very difficult to take out of the sky. So we will see more of these drone operations, and we have for the past month. So that is the resistance report from Jabalia, from the northern West Bank, and finally from South Lebanon. And there will be many more of these until Israel stands down from both the genocide in Gaza and the attempt to push into South Lebanon.
Thank you so much, John. So much to get in. I mean, you know, what you said about Israel trying to look for an off-ramp in Lebanon specifically, as the genocide in Gaza expands and deepens. But, you know, like Israel actually this week, maybe we'll get into this first and then we'll go to 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, who you mentioned is the newly named Secretary General of Hezbollah. But the Jerusalem Post, other Israeli media this week came out with, you know, a lot of reportage about how is the Israeli army, the Northern Command, has quote achieved all of its war goals in Lebanon. And now they're like, you know, they're gonna do the rational thing and try to negotiate a lasting ceasefire with Hezbollah. You know, meanwhile, as you pointed out, you know, the new recruits to the army bases stepping off the bus and never stepping back on. Hezbollah fighters popping up inside a house that was taken over by Israeli soldiers. What can we say about Israel's supposed achievement of any of its war goals in Lebanon, and why would the Northern Command and Yoav Gallant and all these people be insisting that they have achieved victory?
I'm still waiting for them to declare that they want anything more than to secure the border, which was always an operation to secure the physical border along the blue line was always going to need to happen for Israel to move their settlers back into the settlements in the north. And so that to me is not a surprising development. Bombing civilians is not a surprising development to me. Everything that happened in Lebanon has been happening in Lebanon. They killed more than 100 people in Baalbek yesterday. The day before, they killed some 50 or 60 in Tyre, Sur in South Lebanon. And of course, the attacks on the Dahia in Beirut have been brutal. And they're attacks against civilians, against civilian infrastructure, civilian buildings, and banks, as we reported on the show last week. But in terms of face-to-face ground maneuver fighting, Israel is so far not doing what it did in 2006 when it rolled across the border and attempted to encircle Beit Jabal and collapse Hezbollah. They're not making statements of that sort in this battle. If you just, Chief of Staff Halevi just said the other day, he said, in the north, there is a possibility of reaching a sharp end. We have finished Hezbollah's senior chain of command in a very thorough way. So they're using words like that, like we can end this. And I think that they don't have they don't have the stomach or the courage for the kind of war that Hezbollah is going to bring to them. Hezbollah is not going to bring that war to them on the border. But when they move up into the villages of South Lebanon, they're going to get a fierce battle. I don't think Israel is in a position to fight that battle a year and a month into this war with, declining popularity, reservists. If you look at the stats coming out this week, the batches of soldiers killed 5 at a time, they're all reservists. A lot of them were our age. Their army cannot sustain that kind of death toll for months long. And that's why Halevi is talking to his population saying that there's a possibility of there being an off-ramp for this because but when you say off-ramp, you have to think about the fact that they've killed 3,000 people in Lebanon. They've destroyed buildings all over Beirut. And so the thing that I'm specifically talking about is a large-scale ground maneuver deep into Lebanon. The Litani River is 40 kilometers north, and some battle plans said that the goal was to push Hezbollah beyond the Litani River. That is not going to happen.
No.
Anything, I would say they're saying they're at 3 or 4 kilometers. I would say start paying attention when they're at 5 to 10 kilometers, and the death toll in those increments, going 5 kilometers and pushing into places like 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜𝐿, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, they're going to be a vicious fight and defensive positions and more than Israel can handle. But the border itself, Hezbollah is not supposed to be on the border itself. So to evaluate them about a border as if it's the front door of your house and you need to protect that front door is not the way to analyze this. It's forest that Israel can move through before they're in the villages fighting face to face. They have been fighting sometimes face to face, but they are the exception that proves that what we're seeing is mostly standoff fire still now 30 days into this operation.
Yeah, what's so striking to me about the Lebanon front is that the Lebanese resistance lost its entire leadership, most of its senior leaders, including of course Said Hassan Nasrallah, and it doesn't seem to have made difference to the fighting troops. I'm sure it has meant a lot to them, but in terms of the defense of the front lines, the picture you're painting, John, and the reality on the ground that Israel's barely able to step across the border before it has to, before it's repelled. It's so striking, the resilience of the Lebanese resistance, of the fighters on the ground.
If you were to just judge by field reports, you from Hezbollah field reports, say you didn't know anything about what happened in Beirut, if you just followed field reports from day to day to day, you wouldn't see any change. It's not like the day
you wouldn't have known they lost the leadership.
No, you wouldn't know it by statistics, by quality of operation, by number of operation. They're delivered on the same time every day. You wouldn't see it. And these kind of comments by the Israeli generals saying that there's 20% of their rocket capacity, that is a joke. And even for his own dignity, he should not be saying things.
It's not our role to advise the Israelis, but
I would say don't do that. That you look like an idiot doing
it kind of makes you think that, if the Zionists were smart, they would retreat now, because they can point to, like you were saying, John, like they're talking to their population, and maybe they are lining this up, but they can point to concrete achievements from their perspective that they've made, that in terms of they can exaggerate these things, but in terms of the 20%, which I agree seems completely nonsensical, but they can say, we took out the leadership, etc., and they can say, well, we always did say it was only going to be a limited operation. They can point to these kind of things, whereas the longer they stay, the more they're going to be dragged into the quagmire, and the longer they do that, the more they resist. They risk a humiliating defeat and disorganized retreat.
Well, they can't do that, because Hezbollah is not going to play by their rules. And I think maybe we should talk about what Naim Qassem, the new Secretary General, said about Hezbollah said this morning or afternoon in Beirut in his first speech as Secretary General, because it's very indicative. It sort of answers a lot of questions about what the strategy will be and on what terms that Hezbollah might agree to a ceasefire. And I watched the speech and I made some notes, and I'll just sort of hit a few. It was quite a long speech. It was almost an hour long. So I'll just hit what I think are some of the key points. Obviously, he paid very high tribute to Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, his predecessor, as well as to Hisham Safiuddin, who was expected to be Nasrallah's successor, but who was killed very quickly just a few days after. He, of course, paid tribute to Yahya Sinwar as well as to Ismail Haniyeh, the assassinate or the martyred leaders of Hamas. And of Sinwar, he said, this is what Naim Qasim said. He said he was martyred in confrontation until the last breath, and he said he terrified the enemy during his imprisonment and in his freedom, and he will continue to terrify the enemy after his martyrdom. I thought that was such a striking statement. And then he addresses very directly. He says the question will naturally arise: is what will the policy be now that there's a new Secretary General? And he says, my program is the continuation of the program of our leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in all fields: political, military struggle, cultural, social. We will continue to implement the war plans that he put in place with the leadership of the resistance. And he, off the bat, is very firm that there's going to be no abandonment of Gaza, no separate peace by Hezbollah, which is, of course, what the Americans and the Israelis are trying to do. And he says it was a duty to confront the danger Israel poses to the whole region through the doorway of Gaza, and because it is the right of the people of Gaza that everyone should support them. So he's making the case that we should be supporting Gaza as a moral question, as an ethical question. He says it's a Arab value, it's a Muslim value, it's an ethical value. But at the same time, he makes the case again that Nasrallah used to make, that if they defeat Gaza, that's just the first step. Then they're going to come for everyone. So it's in the strategic interest of the region to defend Gaza. And he says, no one should ask us, why did you support them, meaning Gaza? But rather they should ask the others, why are you not supporting the people of Gaza? So he's very firm that this front in support of Gaza is going to continue. Then he addresses, again, critics in Lebanon. This is something we saw Nasrallah do in most of his speeches, where he'd address kind of like, I don't know, for want of a better word, the fifth column in Lebanon, who are always questioning Hezbollah, claiming that they're dragging Lebanon into trouble and they could have stayed out of it. And he addresses that in detail, and he makes a very important point. He uses language which I don't know if Nasrallah used. He probably did, but it struck me in this speech. I mean, he makes the case that he says, look, since the 2006 war, Israel has violated Lebanese sovereignty by land and by air 39,000 times, and that's according to UN figures. So he says, like, how can you accuse us of provoking Israel when Israel is overflying Lebanon hundreds of times a week, gathering intelligence, gathering targeting data, and Israeli generals and media leaders are constantly, he's talking about even before the Al-Aqsa flood, constantly threatening to attack Lebanon and saying a war with Lebanon is inevitable, but we're going to choose the time for it, meaning Israel. And Naim Qasim says, he also talks about, and this is a point that we've mentioned before, how had there been no resistance, there would already be Israeli settlers in Lebanon. And he also makes the point that the resistance came after the Israeli invasion. There was no Hezbollah in 1982. But he says, quote, with resistance, we disrupt Israel's plans, and we are capable of that. But by waiting with the excuse that we don't want to give Israel a pretext to attack, we lose everything. It is better for us to have a resistance with the capability of defensive attack instead of waiting and doing nothing until Israel attacks us. So he's putting forward sort of like the best defense is a good offense kind of strategy. And And he also puts the battle in Lebanon and Gaza in a bigger context. He says, today in Gaza and Lebanon and the region, we are facing a huge scheme. This is not merely an Israeli war against Lebanon and Gaza. This is an Israeli, American, European world war, which brings to bear all their means on a global level in order to destroy the resistance and our people in the region. This is an American-Israeli plan that is completely adopted by America. And then he says, he goes back to talking about Gaza, and he says, how can 43,000 martyrs and 100,000 injured not shake the whole world? It is not possible to sit on the sidelines and watch. We must confront them. It is true that in confrontation there is pain, there are sacrifices, but imagine if we did not resist. They want us to surrender and to rule over our lives and our future generations. And then he says, the legendary resistance in Gaza and Lebanon, that is what will make the future of our generations, God willing. And then, I mean, there's a lot more he says. He speaks for a whole hour, but the key message here is very firm commitment to the resistance. They are not going to slow down their support front in support of Gaza, and they may well escalate. And he at the end of the speech, he addresses the resistance families in Lebanon, the families of the resistance fighters. And he says, you know, you're bearing a heavy burden and this is costly, but we're fighting on our land. He says, we are fighting on our land in our own interest to defend our land and our freedom. We're not fighting on behalf of anyone else. And then this is, of course, to address those who constantly claim that Hezbollah is a tool of Iran. And he has this one very funny line that kind of reminded me of sort of Hassan Nasrallah's humor. And I'll end with this. He says, he asks rhetorically, have any Arab countries offered us weapons and we said no? Did any Western or Eastern countries offer us weapons and we said no? So in other words, he's saying, Iran supports us. They do it out of conviction. We really appreciate it. They pay a high price for that. And we're very grateful to them, but they don't ask anything of us in return. And, if others came and offered us support, we'd take it. So it was a very firm and clear speech, I think.
What differences between leadership can we assess, even at this very early stage, between Nasrallah and 𝐓𝐿? What are your thoughts, Ali and John and Asa?
Well, I'll just say, in terms of what Naim Qasim said, he stressed continuity. He thanked the Hezbollah Shura Council, which is its governing council, for appointing him. He constantly stressed the collectiveness of the leadership and how the war plan that Nasrallah put in place with the resistance, with the leaders of the resistance, in other words, this is a collective plan, is the plan that they're implementing. He also talked about the size and the scale of Hezbollah. He said it's a huge organization with many departments in every walk of life. And that was to stress that this is not an organization that, you just kill the leader and it goes away. Mm-hmm. He was also frank in terms of, he said, we did suffer very severe blows with the pager attacks and the assassinations, but we regrouped, we reorganized according to our plans. He talked about how, he said, we still have first generation or first rank leaders, but we have so many of the second rank leadership. Don't worry, in other words, this organization, he emphasized that this organization is going to survive even the most severe loss of leadership. So It was really continuity is what he stressed.
Yeah.
Naim Qasim has always struck me as a continuity figure anyway. So, I mean, I think that those sort of messages will play well with his local and regional base after the blows that the organization has received in recent months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They have a durable Shura Council. Hamas is in many ways the same. They have a collective leadership structure that is very durable, and it's built that way because they anticipate fighting this battle till victory. You can't have cult of personality leadership that changes one way or the other depending on who's the leader. Like, you can have important leaders, but they're all in consultation. Nasrallah was all in deep consultation with many people, and the assassination spree that Israel went on showed that. It showed the world that he's meeting with all of these key figures all the time. He's not making decisions from up on high and ordering people to do things. There's a durability, a resiliency within the Shura structure, the overlapping Shura structures of the military, social, and political organization. So,
Yeah.
And I think, Naim Qassem is a very logical example. He's a public face of the group. He has been for a long time. He's been speaking for a long time as the public face of the group. He's a historian of the group. I think it's a very logical choice after the death of Hisham Siafuddin.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned Iran's commitment to the resistance in Lebanon. Let's talk a little bit about the attacks on Iran by Israel. It was last week, but it seems like, again, a century ago. Ali, I mean, our colleague Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, wrote an excellent analysis on the attacks. But Ali, what can we say about what we know, about since last week, and what could come next?
Yeah, Maureen did a tremendous job with this analysis. It's really broad-ranging, and I helped a little bit with some of the background on addressing the Israeli and American claims that were leaked to friendly media, particularly Axios. The Americans and Israelis claiming that this Israeli strike crippled, that's the word they used, or significantly set back Iran's ballistic missile production capability. They claim they hit several sites, including a solid fuel production facility, and I think a total of 2 or 3 sites near Tehran. And this, just based on what US intelligence agencies and US think tanks say is completely implausible, because the scale of the Iranian missile program, obviously the Iranians don't publish all the detail about their program. They only show us what they want to see. But we know this is a vast program, that they already have likely thousands of ballistic missiles in store. They have underground factories. And we saw that on October 1st, they fired 200 missiles at Israel, and that was probably just a fraction of their existing arsenal. Now, in terms of their production facilities, we know from, for example, and this is cited in Maureen's article, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, which is one of these Washington think tanks, they have a map from 2006 showing Iranian, or what they say are Iranian, missile production facilities all over the country, dozens of sites, including on the eastern border close to Afghanistan, beyond the range of Israeli weapons at this point, or at least the kinds of weapons Israel has been using to this point. And Iran has announced since 2006 its opening of multiple underground factories, for example. So it's just implausible, that spin. And that was the conclusion we reached even before Alistair Crook, the former British diplomat, came out with his own analysis, which was very interesting. This was on the Judge Napolitano program, I think on Monday. Alistair Crook put forward a very interesting thesis where he said that, in fact, the Israeli attack was aborted, that what it was supposed to happen in 2 or 3 waves, with the first wave focusing primarily on suppressing Iranian air defenses. And then the second or third waves would come in and attack a much larger number of targets. But Crook claims that only the first wave happened, and then the second and third waves were aborted because Israeli planes could not advance far enough for their standoff missiles to reach their targets. So the Israelis are basically launching air-launched air-to-ground missiles, air-launched cruise missiles that they have to fly into Iran or close to Iran and then launch from the air, and then the missiles travel the rest of the way. But according to Alistair Crook, the Israelis, and I don't know what his sources are, but he's a former intelligence, I think MI6 and British diplomat, so he may have some sources we don't know about. But he claims that the Israelis encountered a previously unknown air defense system that prompted them to call off the subsequent waves of the attack, and then just to declare victory, because to admit defeat would be a strategic catastrophe. What we do know is that Iran did buy, this was several years ago, the S-300 air defense system from Russia. And there have been reports recently, these aren't official or Iranian reports, but there have been all sorts of reports that in recent weeks and months, Russia has supplied Iran with even more advanced air defense systems. So is that what happened? I don't know. It's a very interesting theory, but my conservative, or my and Maureen's conservative assessment, based on what we know from what the Americans have said all along about Iran's missile program, and what the Americans are saying now, and what the US mainstream media is reporting, is there is no way that this attack was any kind of significant blow to Iran's ballistic missile program.
Yeah, they certainly did not enter Iran. They fired from outside of Iran in this attack. And when the initial statements went up, Gallant was in his situation room, and he had a fake photo of an oil well fire from many years ago on the background. And then just yesterday, he came out and said that the operation was, quote, the most significant Israeli Air Force operation since the 6-Day War. So they're trying to sell it hard.
Wow.
He said that they will give them that Iran will be at huge disadvantage in the next round. So targeting those air defense systems, targeting the air defense systems outside of the petrochemical and oil installations as a sort of shot across the bow of taking down their oil and gas production, which is what the Americans who flew escort and refueling for this operation were telling the Israelis they weren't allowed to do. So they fired on the S-300s that were guarding those particular sites, and they have to use lighter warheads to travel the distance they needed to travel by, because they were being fired outside of Iran, which limits the damage on the receiving end of those operations. And it's also, I think, important to note that the operation happened and it was telegraphed. Blinken and the Israelis telegraphed to the Iranian regime, that the Iranian government, that the attack was happening, and then Blinken got on a plane and flew home on Friday, and then the attack happened. So very careful, seems like very careful on the American side. Seems like after 13 months of no red lines, it sure looked to me like there was some red lines imposed on Israel by the Americans in this few days before an election time. And we seem to see that they stood.
So
down.
they can do it.
They
can,
obviously can do it, and did in this case, because for Israel to strike those petrochemical and oil facilities is to have Iran respond by targeting similar installations would set the world would set a market run right on the eve of the election, and the Americans were simply not having that. And we watched the lead up to this operation by having Americans deploying whole strike fighter groups to the area to escort, to refuel, to do things that Israel can't do for itself, and to prevent them from entering Iranian airspace where they could go down and be captured and create all kinds of secondary problems. So they took pot shots from outside the border after traveling across a familiar route over Jordan and Iraq.
Well, we will be, of course, watching what happens next. Iran has already said that they're going to retaliate.
Well, they've been unclear about that, I have to say.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they won't.
Right.
They may want to leave Israel guessing, but also I think that this attack was relatively minor. They probably learned a lot from it, and so they may not be in a hurry. They may be keeping their powder dry, but we don't know. The leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was cryptic, let's say, about whether that will happen.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right, two more quick discussion items. As I mentioned in the news report, the Israeli Knesset, the parliament, voted in favor of passed two bills that would basically prevent the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees from operating. What can we say about this move by the Israeli government? What it means, of course, the effects that it's going to have, especially in Gaza. Ali, how are you looking at this? This, the latest in this series of attacks on the agency.
It's interesting because remember back at the beginning of this genocide, the United States led the attack on UNRWA when they suspended the funding on the bogus pretext that several UNRWA workers had been somehow involved in October 7th, and none of that was ever proven as far as I know. And certainly, if it was in any way proven, why would you cancel funding to the whole agency? It was always just a pretext to attack UNRWA. And then we know that UNRWA's European vassals followed suit, and then they gradually reversed course. But at that point, remember, Israel wanted to come up with some alternative to UNRWA, which they controlled or that was under their thumb. And so that's when we saw this business about the humanitarian. Who remembers the pier that floated away? We had so many discussions about that and what it's really for. And now it's just, debris floating somewhere in the Mediterranean, probably. But also there was the attempt to promote organizations like World Central Kitchen. We talked about that at the time, which has close ties to the State Department and to the US government, to promote them as sort of an alternative to UNRWA. But let's look now. So what happened, as you said, Nora, of course, that Israel passed these bills that may outlaw UNRWA within territories controlled by Israel. Let's look at what Matthew Miller, the State Department spokesperson, said in response to this. And this would have been at Monday's State Department briefing on October 28th.
We have made quite clear to the government of Israel that we are deeply concerned by this proposed legislation. The Secretary raised this in the letter that he sent with Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Defense, to Minister of Defense Gallant and Minister of Strategic Affairs Dermer a little over 2 weeks ago. As he made clear in that letter, passage of this legislation could have implications under U.S. law and U.S. policy. That remains the case. Look, UNRWA plays a critical, important role in delivering humanitarian assistance to civilians that need it in Gaza. That's not the only role they play. They play an important role providing services to Palestinians in the West Bank and throughout the region as well. But they really play an irreplaceable role right now in Gaza, where they are on the front lines getting humanitarian assistance to the people they need it. There's nobody that can replace them right now in the middle of the crisis. So we continue to urge the government of Israel to pause the implementation of this legislation. We urge them not to pass it at all. And we will consider next steps based on what happens in the days ahead.
So just very quickly, I want to hear what other people have to say, but it does strike me that this change of tune and suddenly this passionate defense of UNRWA is coming just a few days before the election, when the Harris-Cheney campaign, the Kamala Harris-Dick Cheney campaign, is trying to convince people that it somehow supports Palestinians, and while sending Israel the bombs to keep massacring them. So that's one element, is just disingenuous. And then, but I don't know. I mean, we also know, and we had this discussion with Layla Al-Arian a couple of weeks ago, that the U.S. has been entirely complicit with Israel's knowing starvation of Gaza, including northern Gaza. So how can you trust anything these people say? You simply can't. But it is interesting that he did put on the record that UNRWA is irreplaceable. And that I don't think we've heard that language before. But I don't know, what do other people think of this?
No, I mean, obviously, Matt Miller is disingenuous to the core, and nothing he says is anything but, party line defense of genocide. And he tries to put a very, eloquent spin on it sometimes. I think the timing is a factor. I think that the Harris campaign, the Biden White House, wants to maintain this facade, the charade of, being the more so-called empathetic party to, to Palestinians experiencing a genocide, being funded and armed by the White House. But also, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because there is still some chance that the International Criminal Court could issue warrants, and it would also implicate, I mean, if we look at, past genocides and crimes against humanity, the spokespersons for those regimes that are inflicting the genocides are also held accountable and culpable. I mean, I hate to put much faith in the ICC at this point, because what are they waiting for? What more evidence does it need to indict not just the Israeli government and its soldiers, but also the Americans and the European counterparts and the Canadian counterparts? But maybe it's the U.S. kind of, I don't know, maybe attempting to put some sort of political distance between the White House this week and the Israeli government. I don't know.
Yeah, it does seem to be at least partly an electoral calculation, because the presidential election is so down to the wire. The election is Harris's to lose. Like, she seems to be doing her best to lose it.
Oh yeah.
Do we want to go into that?
Sure, might as well. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on the UNRWA stuff, of course.
Yeah.
Finally, let's talk about this election.
Well, there are a couple. Yeah, there's a couple of. Do you want me to set this up with
Please.
a few items quickly? There's a couple of things that we were looking at. So just, I mean, people may have seen this. It's a few weeks old, but just a reminder that on October 2nd, the Arab American Institute published a poll, and they said, according to a poll of Arab American voters, and they said, according to a new poll of Arab American voters, The Biden administration's handling of the crisis in Gaza has eroded Arab American support, resulting in a now evenly divided community, with each party receiving 38% support. In the presidential race, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are virtually tied at 42 to 41%, respectively. That's pretty extraordinary, given that, as angry Democrats who want everyone to vote for Kamala keep reminding us on social media, he's the Muslim ban guy. But I guess a lot of people are saying, better a Muslim ban than a genocide. I don't know. Others say, well, you might get both, probably. But so that's one thing. And this is important, of course, because this election is so close. All the polls are really statistically tied within the margin of error, and there has been sort of Trump edging up a bit. And this is very true in key swing states like Michigan and Pennsylvania. I'm not an expert on all of this, but I think that the Democrats can't afford to lose either of these states. I think they can manage without Michigan, but they can't manage without Pennsylvania. In any case, they're not going to give anything up. And Michigan, of course, is home to a very large Arab American and Muslim community. And then we had the extraordinary sight in the last few days of a group of Arab American and Muslim leaders in Dearborn, Michigan, appearing with Trump at his rally there. And we actually have a clip that we can watch from local television station 𝐓𝐡𝐞 TV.
Overtime. Dearborn-based Imam Bilal al-Zuhairi met Trump backstage with 20 other religious leaders from across the country to build support for Arab and Muslim Americans.
We believe that our religion is a religion of peace, and we don't want to see no more wars.
Trump accepted the endorsement from Muslim religious leaders as well as from Dearborn Heights Mayor Bill Bazzi.
When he was president, he put a Muslim ban. He supports Israel. So how do you tackle that?
I don't want to talk about the past. Now that he is trying to extend his hand to us, and the fact that he's meeting us, he's listening to us attentively, I think that this is a good gesture.
Meanwhile, on Sunday, Arab American leaders in Dearborn will hold a press conference to endorse the vice president. They write in a statement, despite our deepest disappointment and anger with the Biden administration's failed Middle East policies, we will not abandon our coalition partners. They share our horror over the killings and massive devastation in Gaza and Lebanon.
If elected as president, doesn't keep up with his promises, do you have access to him and his team to express your grievances?
I would like to assume the best, not the worst.
I am proclaiming.
Right. So just a couple of things. Those Arab Americans who did come out on Sunday and endorse Kamala Harris in Dearborn were basically Jim Zogby, who is the head of the Arab American Institute. He's there in that picture on the right-hand side, and a few other people. And he is a longtime Democratic Party loyalist and activist. So it would have been shocking if Jim Zogby did not end up endorsing Kamala Harris. But I think that probably neither those endorsing Trump or Harris likely represent majority opinion. I think many are going to stay home. Many will vote third party. A lot of people might vote for Jill Stein and Butch Ware of the Green Party. And I think for many people, it's just that they're not looking at this sort of in a tactical sense. They're saying genocide is a red line. And the authors, the Harris-Biden administration, the authors of this genocide, there's just a red line. You cannot reward them with a vote. And finally, just in terms of the items we picked out, people are saying, I got this a lot on social media, people saying, well, why aren't people seeking to speak to the Harris administration or to get a seat at the table? Well, they're trying, and we actually see what happens. There was this report that many of the same Muslim community leaders who appeared with Trump had tried to speak to Harris or get a similar meeting with Harris, and that was flatly rebuffed, not for the first time. And then there is a report here from CBS News of what they say is a Muslim community leader who was removed from a Harris rally in Michigan. And it says Dr. Ahmed Ghanim attended the invitation-only event in Royal Oak, Michigan on Monday, excited to hear from Harris and former Senator Liz Cheney. I would not be excited to hear from Liz Cheney or Kamala Harris, but certainly not Liz Cheney. Ghanim said he went through the security checkpoint, sat down in his seat, and was answering emails while he waited for them to begin. 10 minutes later, he said staffers for the Harris campaign came to his seat and asked him to step to the back. He was asked to leave. Later on, he says they contacted him to say they regretted it, but they never provided any explanation.
It's not the first time that's happened either.
No. And the Democrats have a very long history of this. I remember in 2000 when Hillary Clinton ran for Senate in New York, she returned the donations of Arab Americans after Israel lobbyists, protested. And there was always, there's a long history of this, of sort of sincere, hopeful Arab Americans saying, let's get involved, and we'll only get influence when we're involved. And they get involved and they're just completely rebuffed. Their donations are returned. The party attacks them. We've seen that like with prominent Democratic Party activists like Linda Sarsour, who no matter how loyal she was to the party, is constantly being trashed and insulted by its senior figures. And we saw how the committed Democrats of the uncommitted movement, I meant dedicated Democrats of the uncommitted movement at the convention this summer, they said, we're not even asking you now for a ceasefire. We're just saying, let us have 5 minutes on the stage to say you had an Arab on the stage. And the Democrats were, no, absolutely not. So I think
that would have been the easiest, most basic, symbolic, and they couldn't even do that.
Yeah. So we obviously don't know what's going to happen next week, but a lot of people are just like, enough.
Yeah.
We're not playing this game anymore.
Yeah. Well, so the election is next Tuesday. We're actually going to be taking the week off next week. I don't know, Ali, if you want to.
Yeah, well, we're not taking the week off. The Electronic Intifada will still be publishing, so come to the website and read a lot of things. But we are not going to have a live stream next week. And the reason for that is because it's a big week for us. We will be one of the things we'll be doing, it's a major thing, is putting together mailing, which is a very important opportunity for us to communicate with our friends and supporters around the world. And it's a big logistical operation. It's also a time when many of us, sadly not all of us, but many of us in the Electronic Intifada team come together physically in the same space to actually do this. And so it's just the fact that we are a small independent organization means we don't have the capacity to do everything all the time. So we will miss you next week. And I know many of you will miss us, but we will be back. Don't worry. And we will be back in full force on November 13. And in the meantime, there's going to be lots, I have to tell you, over the past, and this is partly in getting ready for our mailing and looking back over the year, I've been watching some of the extraordinary programs that we have produced over the last year, and going back to some that so much has happened this past year that you can't remember everything because it's so overwhelming, or you look back at it with time and it's sort of, you see it differently, and we're looking at ourselves at a different phase and we start to understand things better. So if you miss us, and I know you will, please look at I think it's been almost 200 hours of incredible programming that we have produced with you, as part of this community, with you as viewers and with all our guests and with your support. And so there's lots and lots to revisit. And Of course, the website, we're publishing new articles every day. So we'll be back. It's hard for us to take a week off. We don't want to. But what we're doing is to ensure our sustainability for the long run. And we'll be coming back and talking to you about that in coming weeks too. But it's part of our long-term planning and making sure that we're here for you and for the people of Palestine and Gaza for the long run, that we need to just focus our resources next week on these sort of organizational activities.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ali. Yeah, let's take a look. We published an incredible amount of features again last week. I highlighted one by Asila Mansi about her escape from Jabalia, but there are a few other just unbelievably striking features that we've published. Bashar Muammar's feature on how merely moving around has become a form of resistance. There's let's see if we can also, there's Arij Hijazi, who wrote 3 short vignettes on the killing of doctors. And then we have an inspiring story of determination from a young amputee by Raja Salah. And just, yeah, there it is. Music inspires child who lost hand in Israeli attack. Really incredible writing from these, I mean, brave is not, it barely scratches the surface of, the description of how courageous these writers are. And like Ahmed was saying earlier in the program today, it is a lifeline. Writing is a lifeline. It's an act of defiance. It's an act of resistance and resilience. And, we're just so honored every day to be able to publish stories from so many writers in Gaza. So yeah, please check that out, especially next week. Take the 3 hours and peruse the site. And of course, as always, you can get an early jump on the winter fundraising by going to the Electronic Intifada's website, donating, signing up for our mailing list. And those are all ways that you can support us going forward into our 24th year, 25th year almost. Incredible.
Gosh, I'll have to figure that out. I think 23, yeah.
23, yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Let's just thank everyone at the Electronic Intifada. Thank you to, of course, Tamara Nassar, director and producer of this program, Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, Ali Gerzon, Ali, John, and Asa, and of course, Michael Brown. Almost forgot Michael. Everyone at the Electronic Intifada. Thank you all so much, and we'll be back in a couple weeks. Take care.